The wolfhound broke loose at noon, and every servant at Moorleigh Hall forgot, for one dreadful second, that servants were not supposed to scream. The sound tore across the courtyard like a cracked bell. Linen girls flattened themselves against the laundry wall. A scullery maid dropped a basket of folded napkins into the mud. 2 footmen, brave enough at dinner and useless in danger, stumbled backward behind the pump. Across the grey sweep of Yorkshire stone, Grim came out of the kennel yard like a shadow with teeth, enormous, dark-coated, and silent except for the scrape of his claws against the flags. He was nearly 3 feet at the shoulder, with a head broad enough to make grown men step aside and eyes the colour of old pewter. He did not bark. That was what made him worse. A dog that barked warned the world of its fear. Grim only moved, and the world made way. "Shut the gate," cried Mr. Phelps, the undergroom, though he had already put the gate between himself and the beast. "For mercy's sake, shut it!" No one moved toward it. From the upper terrace, Moorleigh Hall looked down upon the courtyard with all the cold dignity of a house that had survived wars, debts, births, burials, and 3 generations of Dukes of Harrowmere. Its windows shone pale beneath the October sky. Its chimney stood stern against the moor wind. Everything about the place had been built to suggest command. Yet at that moment, command belonged to the wolfhound. Mara Ellery stood near the laundry arch with 6 folded sheets in her arms and no safe place to go. She was not a woman people noticed. At 24, she had learned the art of being useful without becoming visible. She moved softly, spoke only when required, and wore the plain black dress and white apron of a housemaid with the neatness of someone who owned very little and therefore guarded everything she had. Her brown hair was pinned close beneath her cap. Her face was quiet rather than pretty, though there was something steady in her grey eyes that made children and old women trust her before they knew why. No one in the courtyard looked to her for courage. No one looked to her at all. "Mara," hissed Bessie from behind a stack of baskets. "Move, you goose! Move!" Mara could not. Not because fear had frozen her, though fear was there, sharp and cold beneath her ribs. She could not move because Grim had stopped halfway across the courtyard, and she had seen what no one else had seen. The great dog's left forepaw touched the ground lightly. Too lightly. A dark line stained the fur just above the pad. It was not much blood, but it was enough. Grim lowered his head. His eyes fixed upon the fluttering sheets in Mara's arms. A footman made the mistake of shouting. Grim's lips drew back. The courtyard emptied farther, bodies pressing into corners, breath catching, prayers beginning and dying unfinished. Mara tightened her grip on the linen. She knew better than to run from pain. Pain chased what fled from it. Her father, who had once been parish clerk in a village 3 miles beyond the moor road, had told her that when she was small and frightened of a farmer's dog with a thorn in its paw. "A wounded creature doesn't know whether you mean kindness," he had said. "So you must move as though kindness has weight." She had not thought of that sentence in years. She thought of it now. "Do not be foolish," Mrs. Keene snapped from the kitchen steps, her black gown stiff as judgment. "Stand still, girl." Mara was already standing still. Grim took 1 step toward her. Then another. Mud clung to the long fur of his legs. His breath came hard, but not savage. Not yet. The sheets in Mara's arms trembled. She lowered them slowly onto the edge of the stone trough, keeping her hands where the dog could see them. "Easy," she said, so softly that only the nearest servants heard. "I don't want your paw, sir. I only want to see it." Someone made a strangled sound. "She is speaking to him," whispered Bessie. "She has lost her senses." Grim's ears shifted. His great head turned slightly, as if the softness of Mara's voice had reached some place in him that orders never touched. Mara slipped 1 hand into the pocket hidden beneath her apron. Her fingers found the little strip of faded blue ribbon she had carried for no sensible reason since morning. It had once bound a packet of her mother's letters. The color had washed thin with age until it was scarcely blue at all, only the memory of blue. She had meant to mend the edge and keep it tucked away. Instead, she drew it out. Grim growled. The sound moved through the courtyard like distant thunder. 3 servants gasped. Mara stopped at once. She did not snatch her hand back. She did not pretend not to be afraid. She simply waited, breathing slowly, the ribbon loose across her palm. "That's it," she whispered. "You may decide." The wolfhound stared at her. Wynne pressed the laundry sheets against the trough. Somewhere beyond the stable wall, a horse stamped and blew. Mara felt every eye upon her now, which was almost worse than being unseen. If Grim lunged, they would say she had invited it. If she stepped back, the dog might follow and be blamed for that too. She thought of the undergroom's raised hand that morning, of the sharp yelp she had heard before the kennel gate rattled, and anger steadied what fear had shaken. Grim had not become a terror by himself. Someone had taught the household to fear him, and perhaps taught him to expect cruelty first. Slowly, Mara bent. Not low enough to loom over his paw. Not close enough to trap him. Just enough to place the ribbon on the stones between them. "There," she said. "No one will strike you from my side." "Mara Ellery, stand away this instant," Mrs. Keene ordered. "If that beast tears your sleeve, you'll answer for it." Grim's gaze flicked to the housekeeper. A growl gathered again, deeper this time. Mara moved without thinking. She stepped not away from the dog, but slightly before him, as if her small body could shield a creature large enough to knock her down. The foolishness of it should have made the servants laugh. It did not. Grim looked at her back. Then, with a sigh that seemed too weary for such a feared animal, he lowered his head and touched his muzzle to the ribbon. Mara turned. Her heart beat so hard she felt it in her fingertips. "May I?" she asked. Grim did not understand the words. Perhaps he understood the stillness. Perhaps he understood that her hand did not curl into a fist. He shifted his wounded paw forward. A tremor went through the courtyard. Mara knelt on the cold stone, took the ribbon, and wound it once, twice, gently above the shallow cut where a torn bit of wire had scored the flesh. Grim flinched at the first touch. She paused. "I know," she murmured. "It hurts." "I'm sorry." The dog's breath warmed her wrist. His jaws were inches from her face. Mara tied the ribbon in a small, careful knot. It was a poor bandage and a foolish color against all that dark fur, but it held. For one suspended moment, no one spoke. Then Grim lowered his massive head and placed it against Mara's open palm. Not a lunge. Not a warning. A surrender. The sheets on the trough lifted in the wind like white flags. At the far end of the courtyard, the great doors of the house opened. The Duke of Harrowmere had returned without announcement. Alastair Renford stood upon the stone steps in a dark travelling coat still marked by road dust, his hat in one gloved hand, his face as controlled as carved marble. He was taller than the men behind him, lean and severe, with black hair wind-touched at the temples and eyes so still they seemed to miss nothing. Men in Yorkshire spoke of him as they spoke of winter on the moor, not cruel, exactly, but not forgiving either. Since his brother's death, he had spent more months in London than at Moorleigh, and when he came home, the house tightened around him. Servants stood straighter. Guests chose their words. Even laughter knew better than to be careless in his presence. Yet the Duke did not look at the scattered napkins, the muddy linen, or the servants pressed against the walls. He looked at Grim. Then at Mara's hand beneath the animal's head. Something changed in his face. It was not softness. It was too guarded for that. It was recognition struck through with disbelief. "Who opened the kennel gate?" he asked. His voice was not loud, but it crossed the courtyard with more force than shouting. No one answered. Mr. Phelps swallowed. Mrs. Keene descended one step, gathering authority around herself. "Your Grace," the maid interfered before we could secure the animal. "I shall see that she is corrected." Grim lifted his head. The growl that came from him was low enough to make the stone seem to answer. Mara's hand stilled against his neck. The Duke's gaze moved to the faded ribbon tied around Grim's paw. He saw the blood. He saw the torn edge of wire still caught near the kennel latch. He saw, too, Mara kneeling in the mud with her cap crooked, her face pale, and her spine straight. "No one will correct her," he said. Mrs. Keene went very still. "Your Grace?" "No one will strike the dog. No one will touch the maid. Not until I have heard the truth." The servants did not breathe. Mara rose carefully, aware of the mud on her skirt, the watching eyes, and Grimm's great body moving with her as if he had already decided where he belonged. The wolfhound stepped to her side. Not behind the Duke. Not toward the groom. Beside the quiet maid with the faded ribbon in her pocket and fear still trembling through her hands. The Duke descended one step. His eyes met Mara's, and for the first time since she had entered service at Moorleigh Hall, she felt not useful, not invisible, not merely tolerated, but seen. "What is that maid's name?" he asked. "Mara Ellery," Mrs. Keene said, and she said it as though the name itself had tracked mud across the hall carpet. The answer passed through the courtyard with less sound than the earlier screaming, yet it seemed to weigh more. Mara stood with her hands folded before her apron, the skin beneath one thumb still warm from Grimm's breath. The wolfhound remained at her side. That was the trouble. If he had gone back to the Duke, the moment might have become an oddity to be stored away with broken china and kitchen gossip. Instead, Grimm stood close enough that the hem of Mara's skirt brushed his dark shoulder whenever the wind stirred it. The servant saw. The Duke saw. Mrs. Keene saw most keenly of all. Alastair Renfrew descended the remaining steps, each movement controlled, his expression unreadable. "Mara Ellery," he repeated, not loudly. A name spoken by a duke did not need volume. It rose in consequence all by itself. Mara lowered her eyes at once. "Yes, Your Grace." Grimm's ears shifted at her voice. The Duke noticed that too. Mara knew he did, because his gaze moved from the dog to her mouth and then away with a restraint that made the moment stranger, not less so. "You will return to your duties," he said. "And you will not be punished for attending an injury." Mrs. Keene's chin tightened. "Of course, Your Grace. Though I must say, disorder below stairs has a way of multiplying if it is not checked early." "Then check the disorder," the Duke replied. "Not the mercy." No one answered him after that. Mara bent to gather the linen she had abandoned on the trough. The sheets were damp at the edges and would need pressing again. A little mud stained one corner. It was a small disaster, which meant it was the sort of disaster a maid could be blamed for long after greater matters had been forgiven. Grimm moved when she moved. A footman stepped back so quickly he struck his heel against the pump. Mara felt heat rise into her cheeks. "Stay," she whispered, though she did not know whether she spoke to the dog or to her own composure. Grimm did not stay. He followed her through the laundry arch like a shadow too large for the passage, and the servants parted before them with the stiff, offended terror of people who disliked being made ridiculous. By the time Mara reached the lower hall, the story had already run ahead of her. The girl had charmed the beast. The girl had bewitched him. The girl had stared death in the mouth and tied a ribbon around it. In the servants' hall, where the fire smoked and the long table was set for a hurried luncheon, the whispers stopped as soon as Mara entered. That was worse than hearing them. Silence below stairs was never empty. It was a cupboard full of knives. Bessie sat with a piece of bread held halfway to her mouth. Young Tom, the boot boy, stared so openly that the cook cuffed him lightly on the back of the head without looking away from Mara. Mrs. Keene arrived a moment later with the precise tread of a woman who had made discipline her private religion. "The dog remains outside," she said. Mara turned. Grimm had lowered himself just beyond the servants' hall door, too large to be ignored and too calm to be chased. His bandaged paw stretched before him. The faded blue ribbon looked absurdly gentle against all that dark fur. "He followed me, Mrs. Keene," Mara said. "I did not call him. Do you imagine that improves matters?" The housekeeper moved to the head of the table. A housemaid who attracts the notice of a dangerous animal attracts notice of every sort. Notice is not a virtue in service. Mara folded her hands tighter. "No, Mrs. Keene. And do not look as though you have been wronged. His Grace may have spoken generously in the courtyard, but gentlemen do not always understand what must be endured to keep a house from collapsing into chaos." A few servants lowered their eyes. Others watched with hungry caution. Mara knew the rule of such rooms. If she defended herself too sharply, she would be called insolent. If she said nothing, the accusation would settle on her like dust and become part of her. She chose the narrow path between. "I meant only to keep him from being hurt further." You meant to be seen, Mrs. Keene said. The words landed softly. That made them crueler. Mara's face did not change. She had learned that from her father during the last winter of his life, when the parish roof leaked and half the village had opinions about poverty. Her father had copied parish records in a hand so fine that even the vicar praised it, though praise had not kept fever from his lungs or debt from the door. After he died, people remembered that Mara could read, but not that she could grieve. Reading was useful only until it made others uncomfortable. Grief was tolerated only if it kept quiet. I did not wish to be seen, Mara said. Then learn not to stand where eyes may fall. Mrs. Keene turned to the room. Back to your places. The Duke has returned, and there will be more work, not less. The hall loosened at once. Benches scraped. Cups lifted. Breath resumed. Mara took her seat near the lower end, where junior maid sat if they had not offended anyone important that week. Bessie leaned close under the cover of passing a dish. You had your hand under his jaw, she whispered. I thought he'd take it clean off. He was frightened, Mara said. That thing. Bessie's eyes widened. Mara, it's grim. He frightens other things. Mara broke her bread in two. Sometimes those are the ones most frightened. Bessie stared at her as if kindness had become another form of madness. At the far side of the room, the door to the steward's office opened. Mr. Silas Moorleigh stepped out with a ledger tucked beneath one arm. He was a narrow man of 40, always brushed, always dry, always smelling faintly of ink and locked drawers. His authority did not come from rank, but from access. He kept the accounts. He carried keys. He knew which tenants were behind in rent and which servants had family troubles. At Moorleigh Hall, knowledge could be a sharper instrument than a cane. Moorleigh paused when he saw Grim outside the door. The smallest flicker crossed his face. Not fear exactly. Recognition. Then his expression closed. Mrs. Keene, he said, if the lower passages are to become kennels, I should like warning before I entrust papers to them. Mrs. Keene's mouth pinched. The situation is temporary. One hopes so. His gaze moved to Mara. Miss Ellery, is it not? No one called a housemaid miss unless they meant to remind her she was not a lady. Mara will do, sir, she said. Will it? Moorleigh smiled without warmth. You are the late clerk's daughter from Stonemere Parish, I believe. Your father wrote a very elegant hand. Mara felt several eyes turn toward her again. She wished, suddenly and sharply, that she had not sat down. He did, sir. And taught you the skill. A little. A little reading can be a dangerous thing in a servant. It tempts the mind beyond its station. Bessie looked down at her plate. Cook muttered something under her breath but did not speak. Mara lifted her eyes to Moorleigh. She did not raise her voice. My father said reading made a person more careful with truth. The room went still again. It was a small answer. It was also too much. Morley's smile thinned. Truth is often a matter of proper record. He tapped the ledger. And proper records are not the concern of housemaids. He crossed to Mrs. Keene and placed the ledger on the side table while he searched through a stack of folded notes. Mara did not mean to look. She had spent years training her eyes away from things that did not belong to her. But the ledger had fallen open beneath his hand, and a line of figures stood clear in dark ink. Kennel repairs. £3, 12 shillings. Then another entry. Iron latch replacement. Paid twice within 6 weeks. Mara's gaze moved, quick as a startled bird, to the door where Grim lay with his injured paw and the ribbon tied above the cut. The kennel had not looked repaired. The latch had hung twisted, with a torn bit of wire glinting near the wood. Morley's hand came down over the page. "Did you require something, Mara?" he asked. The use of her name now felt more dangerous than Miss Ellery. "No, sir." "Then I suggest you look to your plates, not to estate accounts." "Yes, sir." She lowered her eyes. But she had already seen enough to know something did not sit straight. £3, 12 shillings could feed a poor family for weeks. It could buy more iron than one kennel gate should need. It could also disappear very easily when no one expected a maid to understand numbers. The afternoon fell into hard work. Trunks went upstairs. Fires were laid in rooms that had stood cold for months. Silver was counted, linen checked, lamps filled. Grim remained where he chose, and what he chose was wherever Mara had last gone. If she crossed the lower passage, he rose. If she carried coal scuttles toward the back stair, he followed at a measured pace that made footmen flatten themselves against walls and maids bite back nervous laughter. Twice she tried to send him away. Twice he merely blinked, as though patience was a command he had mastered better than obedience. Near dusk, Mara carried a tray of warm water and cloths toward the boot room, where she hoped to clean the ribbon properly and look again at Grim's paw. She was halfway along the passage when voices drifted from the half-open door of the steward's office. Moorleigh's voice came first, low and irritated. The animal should have stayed confined. Then Lady Cressida Vane answered, smooth as cream poured over a blade. And yet it did not. Now every fool in the house is speaking of a maid. Mara stopped before she could think better of it. Lady Cressida had arrived that afternoon with 2 trunks, a French maid, and the kind of beauty that made rooms rearrange themselves around her. She was fair, composed, and dressed in morning lavender so pale it seemed chosen to flatter sorrow without submitting to it. She was a cousin by marriage, people said, and had known the Duke since before tragedy turned him into stone. A maid can be dismissed, Moorleigh said. Not if His Grace has made a point of noticing her. Cressida's tone sharpened by one perfect degree. Men who are lonely mistake oddity for virtue. We must be careful that this little scene does not become a habit. Mara stepped back, but the tray betrayed her. One cloth slipped and fell against the wall with a wet sound. The voices ceased. The door opened. Lady Cressida stood framed by lamplight, her blue eyes lowering over Mara's apron, the tray, the damp cloth at her feet. Her smile arrived before her kindness did. There you are, she said. The brave little maid. Mara curtsied, careful and low. My lady. Cressida's gaze moved past her. Grim had come silently into the passage and stood several feet behind, his head level with Mara's waist, his eyes fixed on the lady in the doorway. Cressida did not step back. That was her talent. She could make caution look like contempt. How very touching, she said. You have acquired a shadow. Mara kept her hand steady around the tray. He is hurt, my lady. Most dangerous creatures are, if one asks the person foolish enough to excuse them. The words were still smiling, still acceptable, still impossible to punish. Tell me, Mara Ellery, do all wounded things follow you? For a moment, Mara thought of her mother's letters, her father's ink-stained fingers, the villagers who had praised his hand and forgotten his daughter. Then she thought of Grim's paw, the ledger, and the Duke's voice in the courtyard saying mercy as if it were a command. No, my lady, she said. Only the ones no one else will come near. Cressida's smile did not vanish. It hardened. Behind her, Moorleigh closed the ledger with a soft, final sound. Grim took one step forward, not growling, not threatening, only present. At the far end of the passage, unseen by Mara, the Duke of Harrowmere stood in the shadow near the stair. He had heard the last question. He had heard the answer. And for the second time that day, he looked at his wolfhound, then at the quiet maid, as though Moorleigh Hall had hidden something from him in plain sight. The Duke did not speak from the shadow at once. Silence served him too well. It allowed Lady Cressida to believe she still commanded the passage, allowed Mr. Moorleigh to keep one hand upon the closed ledger, and allowed Mara Ellery to stand beneath the weight of her own answer without knowing who had heard it. Grim knew. The wolfhound turned his head before anyone else did, his ears lifting toward the stair. Mara followed the movement and saw his grey standing half in darkness, one gloved hand resting on the banister, his expression so still that it seemed the house itself had paused to learn his judgment. Lady Cressida recovered first. That was one of her gifts. Alastair, she said, with the ease of a woman permitted old acquaintance but not intimacy. You move like a ghost in your own house. A useful habit, the Duke replied. It teaches me what is said when I am not expected. The colour in Moorleigh's face altered by no more than a shade. Mara saw it because she was looking down and servants learned to read the edges of things. Cressida's smile softened into something nearly tender. Then you have discovered that your household is overset by an animal and a romantic imagination. I discovered, the Duke said, that my dog is injured, my steward is anxious over a ledger, and a maid has more composure than half my staff. The words struck the passage cleanly. No one could pretend not to have heard them. Mara felt heat rise to her throat, but she did not lift her chin too high. Compliments from gentlemen were dangerous, not because they were always false, but because other people made them costly. Your Grace, she said, curtsying around the tray in her hands. I was taking warm water to the boot room. Grim followed without being called. The Duke looked at the great dog. So I see. Grim, traitor to all household order, Saturday. The movement was slow, solemn, and final. His bandaged paw stretched forward, the faded blue ribbon dim against the dark fur. At that, something passed through the Duke's face too quickly for anyone but Mara to notice. Pain, perhaps. Or memory. Cressida noticed enough to dislike it. Surely you cannot mean to indulge this, she said. The servants are already whispering. They frequently do. Not about wolfhounds choosing housemaids. Then they have a new subject. Moorleigh cleared his throat. Your Grace, if I may. There is the matter of discipline below stairs. Mrs. Keene has expressed concern that the girl's conduct, however well-intentioned, may encourage disorder. The girl has a name. The Duke did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Moorleigh bowed his head a fraction. Mara Ellery. The sound of her full name in his mouth had a different ugliness from Mrs. Keene's. It made Mara feel recorded rather than recognized. The Duke descended the remaining steps and came into the lamplight. Miss Ellery, put down the tray. Mara obeyed at once, setting it on a narrow oak table by the wall. Grim rose when she moved. Moorleigh stepped back. Stay, the Duke said. The word was addressed to Grim, not Mara, but Grim did not obey him. Not fully. He stayed only because Mara had stopped. For the first time, a faint astonishment broke the Duke's control. It vanished almost immediately, yet Mara saw it. So did Cressida. How extraordinary, she murmured. Or inconvenient. The Duke turned to Mara. Did anyone strike him today? The question was direct. Too direct for the passage. Mara felt Moorleigh watching her. She felt Cressida's smile waiting to use whatever answer she gave. I heard a yelp from the kennel yard before he broke loose, Your Grace, she said. I did not see the cause. That is not what I asked. Her fingers tightened. I did not see anyone strike him. The Duke's gaze remained on her. But you suspect something. It was not truly a question. Mara should have retreated into ignorance. A wise servant did not suspect. A wise servant polished, carried, folded, vanished. But Grim's paw had trembled beneath her hand. The kennel latch had carried a torn wire edge. The ledger had shown repairs paid for twice over. Truth, her father had once said, did not become smaller because one was paid less to speak it. I suspect he was hurt before he ran, she said. That is all I can honestly say. Moorleigh gave a light laugh. Housemaids are observant when observation costs them nothing. Mara looked at him then. Not boldly enough to be called insolent. Not timidly enough to satisfy him. Observation often costs a great deal, sir. The passage grew very quiet. The Duke's eye shifted to her face, and there again was that disconcerting sense of being seen not as an apron, not as hands, but as a mind. Cressida exhaled gently. My dear girl, you must learn that cleverness is not always kindness. Nor is silence always peace, Mara said before she could stop herself. It was too much. She knew it as soon as the words left her. A servant's truth could be honest and still punishable. Moorleigh's mouth thinned. Cressida's brows lifted. Grim made a sound low in his chest, not quite a growl, but enough to remind everyone that he stood there by Mara's skirts. The Duke looked down at him. Enough, he said. This time Grim obeyed. Not because he was cowed. Because the Duke's voice had changed. It had lowered into something private, threaded with an old grief that briefly stripped rank from the room. Mara heard it and understood, without knowing the story, that Grim was not merely a dog to him. He was the last warm thing tied to a colder past. "Miss Ellery," the Duke said, more formally now, "you will show me where you found the cut." Cressida straightened. "Alastair, surely that is work for the groom." The groom was hiding behind a gate. The Duke did not look at her. Miss Ellery was not. Mara picked up the tray again because her hands needed something to do. "The boot room is this way, Your Grace." "Leave a tray." "Yes, Your Grace." She set it down. Grim stepped beside her. The Duke watched the movement with a stillness that pressed upon the air. Then he turned and followed Mara down the lower passage, past the turning to the scullery, past the row of pegs where aprons hung to dry, toward the narrow door that led back to the kennel yard. It was improper enough to make Mara aware of every wall, every open doorway, every possible eye. The Duke seemed aware as well, for he stopped before the passage became too narrow and called to the footman at the far end. "Phelps. With us." The undergroom appeared reluctantly, cap in hand, face pale. Propriety restored itself by a few inches. Cressida remained behind, but Mara felt her gaze between her shoulders as surely as a touch. Outside, the wind had sharpened. The sky had sunk toward evening, and the stone flags still held damp marks where the linen had fallen. Grim moved more slowly now, favoring the poor but refusing to be left. Mara led them to the kennel gate. The latch hung crooked. Near its lower hinge, a thin loop of wire had been twisted through the iron and left jagged where it had snapped. The Duke crouched, not caring that the hem of his traveling coat brushed the dirt. Phelps swallowed audibly. "It wasn't like that this morning, Your Grace." "Then how was it?" "Fastened proper." "Properly," the Duke said, still looking at the latch. Phelps flushed. "Properly, Your Grace." Mara kept her eyes on the wire. The edge would catch a paw if he forced through. The Duke glanced at her. "Yes." One word. But it held weight. He had seen what she had seen. That should have comforted her. Instead, it unsettled her more deeply than doubt. Doubt was familiar. Recognition was not. Phelps shifted. "Begging pardon, Your Grace, but Grim has a temper. Always has. Since Lord Edmund passed, he will not take to handling." The Duke's hand stilled on the latch. The name fell into the yard like an object dropped into deep water. Lord Edmund. Mara knew only the outline. Every house knew the outline of its master's tragedy. An elder brother dead. A title passed too early. A younger son turned duke before grief had finished with him. Grim had belonged to Lord Edmund first, some said. Or had been trained by him. Or had been with him the day the accident happened. Stories below stairs changed in the telling, but sorrow left a shape even gossip could not entirely spoil. "He has a memory," the Duke said. "That is not the same as a temper." Phelps looked down. "No, Your Grace." Mara had no right to speak. She spoke anyway, softly. A frightened creature often remembers the hand, not the reason. The Duke looked at her. The wind moved once through the yard, lifting the edge of her cap ribbon and pressing cold through the thin sleeves of her work dress. Mara dropped her gaze. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I spoke out of turn." "You spoke accurately." Nothing in the sentence was warm, yet Mara felt the strange force of it all the same. He did not flatter. He did not soothe. He placed the truth where it belonged and left it there. Grim lowered himself beside her, his shoulder touching her skirt. The Duke's eyes followed that small contact. "Why you?" he asked. The question was too quiet for Phelps. It was not too quiet for Mara. She did not pretend to misunderstand. "I do not know, Your Grace." Dogs know things men excuse. Perhaps he knows I am not important enough to harm him. The Duke's expression changed. This time it was no flicker. It was a shadow crossing stone. "Do you believe importance grants a person permission to harm?" "No, Your Grace." Mara's answer came at once. "But some believe it protects them afterward." Phelps stared hard at the ground, as if the stones had become fascinating. The Duke rose slowly. For a moment, he looked not at the kennel, nor at Grim, but toward the long windows of Moorleigh Hall, glowing now with lamplight and judgment. "Miss Ellery," he said, "you are not to tend Grim alone again." Mara's stomach tightened. "Yes, Your Grace. You misunderstand me." He turned back. "If he requires tending, Phelps will stand present. Or another servant of suitable rank. No one is to say you sought privacy with what does not belong to your station." The words should have stung. Instead, because of the way he said them, they became a shield. Mara understood that he had seen not only the wound, but the shape of the gossip already gathering around her. "Thank you, Your Grace." He gave the smallest nod. Then his gaze settled on the faded ribbon. "Where did you get that?" "It was mine." "Was?" "It belonged to a packet of my mother's letters." Her voice remained steady. She was proud of that. "I had it in my pocket to mend." Grim's head turned at the sound of her voice. The Duke looked from the dog to the ribbon, and Mara saw the memory return to him, sharper this time. "My brother once tied a blue scarf to Grim's collar during a storm," he said. It was so unexpected that even Phelps looked up. The Duke seemed to regret the words as soon as they had escaped. His face closed again. "Have the wire removed." Quietly. "And find who was responsible for the kennel repairs." "Yes, Your Grace," Phelps said. "Miss Ellery," the Duke added. Mara curtsied. "Your Grace? If anyone speaks of punishment for today's events, you will refer them to me." Her breath caught, but only barely. "I would not wish to cause trouble." "You did not cause it." He looked at the broken latch. "You revealed it." By the time Mara returned to the lower hall, the house had shifted. Not much. Great houses did not move easily. Yet servants stepped aside before Grim and Mara now, and their silence had changed flavor. It was no longer only mockery. It had acquired uncertainty. Mrs. Keene stood near the linen press, waiting. "Well," she demanded. Mara folded her hands. "His Grace asked that no one speak of punishment for today's events except through him." Mrs. Keene's face tightened until every line looked carved. "How fortunate for you." "I did not ask for it." "That," said the housekeeper, "is rarely necessary when one has learned how to be pitied." Grim lifted his head. Mara laid one hand, very lightly, above the ribbon on his neck. Not to command him. To steady herself. "I have not learned that, Mrs. Keene." Her voice remained low. "I have only learned not to leave a wound untended." For once, Mrs. Keene had no answer ready. Across the lower passage, Lady Cressida watched from the stair landing, her gloved hand resting on the rail. Beside her, Mr. Moorleigh murmured something too low to hear. She did not look pleased. Neither did he. And far above them, in the study where his brother's portrait hung over the mantel, the Duke of Harrowmere stood with a broken piece of kennel wire in his palm and the first uneasy certainty that his house had begun lying to him long before Mara Ellery had ever spoken the truth. By 6 o'clock, Moorleigh Hall had dressed itself for dinner as if nothing in the world had ever been broken by a crooked latch or mended by a maid's ribbon. The great dining room glowed with candlelight. Silver warmed beneath the flames. Crystal caught every movement and fractured it into small, elegant lies. Above the mantel, the painted faces of dead Renfords looked down with the cool patience of people who had never needed to explain themselves to anyone below stairs. Mara Ellery stood in the service passage with a tray of soup plates balanced carefully in her hands and Grim lying just beyond the turn of the corridor where no dinner guest could see him. He had refused the kennel after Phelps removed the wire from the latch. He had refused the boot room. He had refused the kitchen yard. At last, with an expression of deep suffering that made even the cook mutter, "The great brute has made his choice," he had lowered himself near the green baize door that separated service from splendor. Every time Mara passed, his eyes opened. Every time she returned, they closed again. "You will not encourage him," Mrs. Keene whispered, close to Mara's ear. "You will not speak to him. You will not glance at him. This house has endured grief, debt, and a dozen incompetent undermaids. It shall not be undone by one girl and one dog. No, Mrs. Keene. And you will serve without drawing attention." Mara looked through the crack of the baize door toward the dining room, where Lady Cressida Vane sat at the Duke's right hand in pale silk that seemed almost silver beneath the candles. Yes, Mrs. Keene. It was easier to promise invisibility before one had been noticed. Mara had spent years moving around people who did not wish to see the hands that filled their glasses and carried away the plates they had emptied. She knew the proper angle of lowered eyes. She knew how to stand near a wall without appearing to lean. She knew how to hear everything and remember nothing, at least when asked. But that evening, attention moved strangely. It did not fall where rank expected it to fall. Twice already, Mara had felt the Duke's gaze touch her and move away before courtesy could become scandal. He sat at the head of the table, dark and severe in evening dress, saying little while the local gentry performed their careful cheer around him. Sir Lionel Partridge spoke too loudly of the hunting in Northumberland. Mrs. Partridge praised the venison before tasting it. The Reverend Mr. Alder, invited because a vicar softened the edges of any gathering, asked after the tenants with genuine concern and received from Mr. Moorleigh an answer so polished it slid past meaning. Lady Cressida managed all of them with a smile that never tired. "His Grace has been too long absent from Moorleigh," she said, lifting her glass only an inch. "One begins to fear Yorkshire will forget how to behave without him." "Yorkshire behaves as it chooses," the Duke replied. "That is often its chief recommendation." Gentle laughter moved around the table. Cressida's smile deepened, though her eyes did not warm. "And the household? Does it also behave as it chooses?" The question was light. Too light. Mara entered with the second footman behind her, carrying the sauce. She kept her gaze on the sideboard and moved to Mrs. Partridge's left shoulder. "The household has had an eventful day, I understand," Cressida continued. "One must admire rustic courage when it appears in unexpected places." Sir Lionel leaned forward. "Ah, yes. Your wolfhound, Harrowmere. Magnificent creature. I saw him as we came in. Looks as if he could pull down a stag by himself." "He generally prefers firesides," the Duke said. "And judgment," Cressida added. "He appears to have selected a favourite." Mara felt the room's attention shift before anyone looked at her. It was like a draft beneath a door. The second footman stiffened. Mrs. Keene, stationed near the sideboard, became still enough to frighten the spoons. Mara set down a plate without sound. "Indeed?" Mrs. Partridge asked. "How charming." "Is it charming?" Cressida tilted her head. "I suppose it depends upon whether one admires animals for their instincts or excuses them for their mistakes." The Duke's hand rested beside his glass. One finger moved once against the stem. "Grim is not the subject of dinner." "Forgive me. I meant only that loyalty is so easily misplaced." Cressida turned as Mara passed behind her chair. The movement was small, perfectly timed, almost graceful. Her glove slipped from her lap and fell to the carpet just beyond the reach of her shoe, near the green baize door. "Oh," she said softly. "How careless of me." Mara stopped because a servant stopped for fallen things. It was one of the earliest laws she had learned. A spoon, a glove, a handkerchief, a lady's fan, a gentleman's pride. If it fell, someone below stairs bent to restore it. She stepped toward the glove. At that exact moment, Grim's head appeared through the half-open baize door. The dining room inhaled. No one screamed. Gentlefolk did not scream at dinner. They stiffened, which was the same thing wrapped in better manners. Grim's dark body filled the doorway, his bandaged paw forward, the faded blue ribbon visible even in candlelight. His eyes fixed not upon Cressida, nor upon the guests, but upon Mr. Moorleigh, who had risen from a side chair near the wall with an account envelope in his hand. The steward had been speaking quietly to a footman. Now he froze. Cressida's fallen glove lay between Mara and the dog like a test. Mara understood too late that it had been made one. If she bent, Grim might move. If Grim moved, the guests would see a beast answering a maid. If she did not bend, she failed in service. The pause lasted only a breath, but it was long enough for Cressida to smile. "How very devoted," she murmured. "Does he fetch gloves for you as well, Mara?" Mara lowered her eyes. Heat rose beneath her cap. "No, my lady." "Then perhaps you fetch for him." A soft laugh came from one end of the table. It died when the Duke looked that way. Mara bent and picked up the glove, careful not to move quickly. Grim did not come farther into the room. Instead, he stepped sideways, placing his body between Mara and Moorleigh with such deliberate calm that even Sir Lionel noticed. "By heaven," the older gentleman said. "He is guarding her." Cressida's eye sharpened. "From whom?" "We are all friends here." Moorleigh recovered himself and gave a little bow. "The animal has been unsettled all day, my lady. I advised earlier that he be confined." "And yet," Cressida said, turning back to the table, "some influence seems to soothe him." Mara held out the glove on a silver salver. Cressida did not take it at once. She let Mara stand there, arm extended, every eye upon the white glove and the black sleeve beneath it. "You must tell me your secret," Cressida said. "A household can always use a maid who understands dangerous creatures." The words were acceptable. That was their cruelty. Mara kept her hand steady. "I have no secret, my lady." "No? Only that pain is quieter when it is not mocked." Silence struck the room. It was not a loud answer. It was not even an accusation. But it carried. The Reverend Alder looked down at his plate, as if suddenly ashamed of the table. Mrs. Partridge blinked in surprise. Morley's mouth tightened. Lady Cressida took the glove at last, her fingers brushing the salver without touching Mara. "How poetic," she said. "His Grace keeps a philosophical maid." "His Grace," the Duke said, and now the room truly stopped, "keeps a household in which servants are not provided for entertainment." Cressida turned toward him slowly. "My dear Alastair, you mistake me. I was praising her." "No," he said. "You were measuring how much humiliation could be hidden inside praise." The color did not leave Cressida's face. She was too skilled for that. But something behind her eyes hardened like frost. "Then I shall be more careful. I recommend it." Mara stood motionless, the empty salver light in her hand and her heart too heavy beneath it. She wanted to vanish. She wanted, absurdly, to thank him. She wanted never again to be the reason a dining room went silent. But Grim still stood at the door, and the Duke had not looked away from Lady Cressida. This was not rescue as Mara had imagined rescue in childhood stories. There was no softness in it. No sweeping declaration. Only a boundary drawn in public by a man powerful enough to make others step back from it. "Mrs. Keene appeared at Mara's shoulder and took the salver with a grip sharp enough to pinch. "Return below," she breathed. Mara curtsied to the table and withdrew through the baize door. Grim backed away with her, never turning his back on the dining room until the door swung shut between them. The passage beyond felt colder than before. Mara pressed one hand to the wall and steadied herself. Grim leaned his shoulder lightly against her skirt. For a moment, she allowed the contact. Only for a moment. "You must not do that," she whispered. "They will blame you for my standing there." Grim looked up at her with solemn eyes. From the dining room, voices resumed in careful fragments, brittle as thin china. Then came the Duke's voice, lower than the rest, impossible to distinguish but impossible not to feel. Mrs. Keene entered the passage, her face pale with fury. "You have made yourself impossible to ignore." "I answered a question, Mrs. Keene." "You answered a lady." "Yes." Mara swallowed. "Because she asked me one." The housekeeper stared at her as though she had grown strange in a single day. Courage in the wrong place becomes insolence. Then perhaps fear in the wrong place becomes obedience. The words escaped before wisdom could stop them. Mrs. Keene's lips parted. No sound came. Grim's tail moved once against the floor, soft and heavy. At the far end of the passage, behind the narrow service stair, Moorleigh appeared. He should still have been in the dining room. Instead, he stood half concealed by shadow, watching Mara with the expression of a man who had just found a loose thread in a fabric he needed whole. "Mrs. Keene," he said smoothly, "Lady Cressida requests the removal of the next course be managed without further display." His eyes shifted to Grim. Then to Mara. "And His Grace may wish to review the North study papers after dinner. I will see that they are secured." Mara did not move. The phrase struck her because she had heard it before. North Study Papers. Cressida had spoken it in the lower passage. Moorleigh had shut the ledger when she passed. Now his hand rested inside his coat near the pocket where a narrow key chain usually hung. Mrs. Keene turned away with a command for the footman, but Mara remained very still. Grim's ears lifted. He was listening too. Moorleigh noticed. His smile returned, thin and polite. You have a remarkable talent, Mara, for being near matters above your station. Mara lowered her eyes, but not before she saw the small white mark on his cuff. Not flour. Not dust. Wax, perhaps. Fresh wax, pale against black cloth. No, sir, she said. I am only where I am sent. Then pray you are sent more wisely tomorrow. He left them with that. Grim watched him go, a low sound gathering and fading in his chest. Mara looked toward the stair that led to the north corridor and then back to the closed dining room door, behind which the Duke of Harrowmere had made a lady careful and a maid visible. Gratitude should have been simple. Instead, it frightened her. Visible things could be admired. They could also be hunted. That night, when the last plate had been cleared and the last candle snuffed in the dining room, Mara crossed the lower hall with a basket of folded napkins. At the turn near the servants' stair, she paused. Above her, on the landing that led toward the private rooms, Mr. Moorleigh stood before the north study door. He looked once over his shoulder. Then he slid a key into the lock and entered a room no steward should have needed after midnight. The door closed without a sound. Grim pressed against Mara's side, warm and watchful. She did not call out. She did not follow. She only stood in the darkness with the folded napkins in her arms and the dreadful certainty that the great house had not finished revealing its wounds. By morning, the north corridor had acquired the stillness of a room holding its breath. Mara noticed it before she understood why. Servants were sent there often enough to polish the long table beneath the portraits, lay fires in guest chambers, carry coal, collect empty cans, or dust the frames of dead Renfords who looked down as though they had never misplaced a spoon or told a lie. Yet that day Mrs. Keene assigned the passage twice, then changed her mind twice, and finally placed the work in Mara's hands with the pinched expression of a woman giving a candle to someone standing too near gunpowder. The north corridor, she said. Only the corridor. Not the study. Not the book presses. Not the cabinet by the west window. You will dust the sconces, take away the ashes from the small grate outside the study, and return directly below. Mara accepted the cloths and ashpan. Yes, Mrs. Keene. Do not look pleased. I am not pleased. Do not look frightened either. It tempts people. Mara lowered her eyes. Yes, Mrs. Keene. The housekeeper held her a moment longer, as though hoping guilt might rise like steam if stared at hard enough. Then she turned away, and Mara climbed the back stair with Grim padding behind her, too large for secrecy and too silent for comfort. Phelps had been ordered to accompany the dog whenever Mara tended him, but Grim had developed a talent for appearing where he had not been invited. No one below stairs wanted to seize his collar. No one above stairs wanted to admit they had retreated from a dog. So Grim moved through Moorleigh Hall as if he had remembered that the house had once belonged to him too. At the top of the stair, Mara paused. You cannot come into the corridor, she whispered. Grim looked at her. You truly cannot. He blinked. If Mrs. Keene sees you, she'll say I led you here. Grim remained unmoved by household discipline. Mara sighed, opened the service door, and stepped into the north corridor. The air there was colder than below. Not by much. A degree or two, perhaps, but enough to make the skin tighten at the wrists. The passage ran along the older wing of the house, where the windows were narrow and deep-set, looking over the moor in a line of grey rectangles. The north study door stood halfway down, polished black oak with a brass handle and a lock that always looked recently touched. Last night, Mara had seen Mr. Moorleigh enter that room after midnight. This morning, the door was closed, and no sound came from within. She began with the sconces. Work steadied the mind. Rub the brass. Fold the cloth. Shake the soot into the pan. Do not imagine keys sliding into locks. Do not imagine fresh wax on a steward's cuff. Do not imagine a ledger closed too quickly beneath a pale hand. Grim lay across the threshold of the service door behind her, not in the corridor exactly, but not out of it either. His injured paw rested forward, the faded blue ribbon still tied above the cut, now cleaned and neater than it had any right to be. Mara had meant to remove it and replace it with linen, but Grim had objected with a low sound so wounded in spirit that Feltz had crossed himself. The ribbon remained. Mara moved to the small grate near the study and knelt to clear the ashes. The fire had not been lit there since the previous afternoon, but a trace of heat lingered in the iron. Someone had used it late. Not enough for warmth. Enough to burn something small. She lifted the ashpan closer and saw, among the grey flakes, a curl of paper blackened at the edge but not destroyed. Her fingers hovered. A servant did not read what she found in ashes. A servant did not search for secrets in rooms guarded by brass locks. A servant did not become safer by knowing more than she could prove. Yet the paper had turned just enough for ink to show, kennel. Beneath it, half a word, repair. Mara did not take it. She only looked. That was the difference she clung to. Looking was not stealing. Remembering was not theft. A soft click came from inside the study. Mara straightened so quickly that the ashpan tilted. A whisper of grey dust spilled across the hearthstone. Grim lifted his head. The study door opened 3 inches. Mr. Moorleigh stepped out, and for once his composure was not ready before he was. He wore the same dark coat as the night before, though brushed clean, and his key chain had been tucked hastily beneath his waistcoat. In one hand he held a narrow packet sealed with pale wax. The packet vanished behind his back as soon as he saw Mara. "You are industrious," he said. Mara rose, ashpan in hand. "Mrs. Keene sent me to clear the grate, sir." "Did she?" His gaze moved to the ashes. "How thorough of her." Grim rose from the far end of the corridor. The movement was slow, but Moorleigh heard it. His eyes flicked toward the dog and back again. "The animal should not be here." "I did not bring him, sir." "You never do you? And yet he arrives." Mara held his gaze for no more than a second. "Yes, sir." Moorleigh crossed to the coal scuttle beside the wall, the one used for the corridor grate, and bent with an ease that looked practiced rather than casual. His hand went behind the brass bucket. The packet disappeared there, not in the coal itself but beneath the folded square of sacking on which the scuttle stood. Mara saw the corner of pale wax before he straightened. She wished she had not. Knowledge entered quietly and closed the door behind itself. "You have ash on your sleeve," he said. Mara glanced down. There was no ash. When she looked up, he was watching her face. Testing her. "Thank you, sir." A careful girl would brush it away. "Yes, sir." She wiped her sleeve though it was clean. Moorleigh smiled. "Your father was careful too. Too careful in some matters, not careful enough in others." The words touched something old and unprotected. Mara kept her voice even. "You knew my father." "I knew of him. Parish men leave records. Debts leave better ones." Grim moved one step forward. Mara did not turn, but she felt the floor change beneath his weight. "If you have finished here," Moorleigh said, "you may return below. Mrs. Keene told me to dust the window ledge." Then Mrs. Keene was overgenerous in her instructions. His smile thinned. "Return below." Mara curtsied. "Yes, sir." She lifted the ashpan, gathered her clothes, and walked away without looking toward the coal scuttle. Every nerve in her body longed to look. She did not. Grim waited until she reached him, then turned with her toward the service door. Behind them, Moorleigh remained still. Mara could feel his attention like cold rain between her shoulder blades. Only when the door closed did she allow herself to breathe. The back stair was empty. For 3 steps, she descended. On the 4th, she stopped. Grim stopped too. She looked at the ashpan in her hand, at the smear of grey dust along its rim, and at the tiny blackened curl of paper that had clung to the damp edge where spilled ash met iron. She had not meant to take it. She had not even known it was there. The word kennel showed faintly through the soot. Below, voices rose from the kitchen passage. Above, the service door remained closed. Mara took the burnt scrap between 2 fingers and folded it once into the corner of her apron pocket, beside nothing now, because the blue ribbon was still on Grim. "I should not have done that," she whispered. Grim leaned his broad head against her hip. "That is not absolution." Still, she went down. By noon, the whole house had changed its weather. Lady Cressida sent for hot water twice and rejected both cans as insufficiently hot. Mrs. Keene inspected the linen cupboard as if rebellion might be folded between sheets. Moorleigh passed through the lower hall 3 times, each time asking a question that did not need answering. Had anyone been near the north corridor? Had any maid misplaced a dusting cloth? Had the Duke requested the study key? Mara answered nothing she had not been asked directly. The burnt scrap lay in her pocket like a coal that had forgotten to cool. Near 3 o'clock, as rain began to tap softly against the narrow windows, Mara was ordered to carry fresh kindling to the blue sitting room. The quickest way required crossing the small landing beneath the north corridor. She did not hesitate. Hesitation was confession to people eager to discover guilt. Grim followed her, as always, though Phelps trailed several yards behind under the Duke's order, pretending not to be relieved by the distance. At the landing, a voice called from above. "Miss Ellery." The Duke stood at the rail, dressed not for guests but for estate work, his dark coat plain and his expression grave. Mara stopped at once. Phelps removed his cap. Grim went up the first 2 steps before Mara could speak. "Your Grace," she said. "You were in the north corridor this morning." It was not an accusation. It was not yet trust either. "Mrs. Keene sent me to clear the grate. Mr. Moorleigh says he found ash disturbed near the study." Mara's fingers tightened around the basket handle. "I spilled a little, Your Grace." "Did you enter the study?" "No, Your Grace." "Did you touch anything belonging to my papers?" The burnt scrap seemed to burn through the fabric of her pocket. She had not touched his papers. Not whole. Not knowingly. Truth could be exact and still feel like concealment. "No, Your Grace." His eyes remained on her. "You are certain?" "I am certain I did not enter the study or touch your papers." The carefulness of her answer did not escape him. His gaze sharpened. "But you saw something." Phelps shifted at the foot of the stair. Grim sat on the step above Mara, placing himself between them all as if he understood judgment better than language. Mara knew how this could look. A maid near the study. A steward anxious over accounts. A Duke whose attention had already made her vulnerable. If she spoke, Moorleigh would know. If she stayed silent, whatever was hidden would stay hidden too. She set the kindling basket down. "Your Grace, I saw Mr. Moorleigh leave the study this morning with a sealed packet. He placed it behind the coal scuttle in the corridor. I did not take it." The Duke's face did not change. "Why did you not tell me at once?" "Because I am a housemaid, Your Grace, and housemaids who accuse stewards do not usually remain housemaids." It was too honest. Phelps stared at his boots. Rain tapped faster against the glass. The Duke came down 2 steps, then stopped, keeping the proper distance. "Is that all?" Mara drew the burnt scrap from her pocket. The movement cost her more than the words had. She held it out on her open palm. This was caught on the edge of the ash pan. "I did not mean to remove it. But I saw the word kennel." The Duke took it without touching her hand. His eyes moved over the charred paper. Something cold entered his expression. Not toward her. Toward the word itself. "Phelps," he said. "Go to the north corridor. Look behind the coal scuttle. Touch nothing else. Bring what you find." Phelps nearly ran. Mara stood at the foot of the stair with Grim beside her and the Duke above her, and for a moment the silence between them held more danger than speech. "You should have told me sooner," he said. "Yes, Your Grace." "But you had reason to be afraid." "Yes, Your Grace." The answer was barely audible. He looked at her then, not as a duke looks at a maid who has inconvenienced him, but as a man forced to see the cost of his own house. "You may be afraid," he said. "You may not be untruthful. Mara lifted her chin. I have not been untruthful. The words came steady, though her heart did not. Your Grace may doubt me. I will not invent a confession to comfort anyone. For the first time since she had met him, the Duke looked away first. Not in dismissal. In thought. Phelps returned breathless a minute later with empty hands and a frightened face. Nothing there, Your Grace. Begging pardon. No packet. The landing seemed to tilt beneath Mara's feet. She had known what she saw. She had known. The Duke turned back to her. Doubt crossed his face, quick but real. It struck harder because she had begun, foolishly, to hope for something else. Before he could speak, Moorleigh's voice drifted from the corridor above. Is something missing, Your Grace? He stood near the rail with Lady Cressida beside him, her pale hand resting lightly on the banister. Moorleigh looked calm now. Too calm. Cressida's eyes moved to Mara, then to Grim, then to the burnt scrap in the Duke's hand. How unfortunate, she said softly. It seems the little maid sees secrets everywhere. Grim rose, the sound in his chest low and warning. Mara did not move. She folded her empty hands before her apron and held herself upright beneath all their eyes. The Duke looked from the missing packet to Moorleigh's composed face, then to Mara's pale one. In that suspended moment, truth had no proof except the word of a maid, and everyone in Moorleigh Hall knew how little such a word was supposed to weigh. The silver seal vanished before breakfast, and by 8 o'clock every whisper below stairs had learned Mara Ellery's name. It had not vanished quietly. Nothing precious ever did in a great house. It disappeared with a footman's pale face, Mrs. Keen's sharp intake of breath, and Mr. Moorleigh's grave announcement that the Duke's private study had been disturbed after all. The seal was small, no longer than 2 inches, fashioned in heavy silver with the Harrowmere crest cut deep into the base. It had belonged to the Duke's father, and to his father before him. Letters bearing that seal opened doors, settled rents, dismissed men, promised money, and made commands look like honor. A lost spoon could be replaced. A lost seal suggested betrayal. By the time Mara entered the servants' hall with a basket of folded cloths, the accusation was waiting for her as surely as if someone had placed it upon her chair. The room went silent. Not the silence of fear this time. The silence of appetite. People wanted to know whether she would cry. They wanted to know whether she would confess. They wanted, most of all, to know whether the Duke would still protect a maid when an heirloom had gone missing. Mrs. Keen stood at the head of the long table, her keys gathered in one fist. Mr. Moorleigh stood beside her with his ledger tucked beneath his arm and sorrow arranged upon his face like a black cravat. Lady Cressida Vane should not have been below stairs at all, but there she stood near the service doorway in a morning gown of soft grey, gloved and composed, as if she had descended into the servants' world only because duty had forced refinement into unpleasant places. Mara stopped just inside the threshold. Grim stopped with her. The wolfhound's presence moved through the room before any word could. Benches scraped back an inch. A kitchen maid covered her mouth. Grim's bandaged paw touched the flagstones carefully, the faded blue ribbon still fixed above the cut. His eyes went to Moorleigh and stayed there. Mara Ellery, Mrs. Keen said. Put down the basket. Mara set it on the nearest bench. Her hands remained empty at her sides. Empty hands, she had learned, did not always prove innocence. Sometimes they only made it easier for others to fill them with blame. Yes, Mrs. Keen. The Duke's silver seal is missing from the north study. A sound moved through the servants. Mara heard Bessie whisper a prayer under her breath. I am sorry to hear it, Mara said. Moorleigh looked at her as though she had answered incorrectly. How composed you are. Would fear restore it, sir? The question left her before she could soften it. Several servants lowered their heads. Mrs. Keen's eyes flashed. You will answer only what is asked. Yes, Mrs. Keen. Lady Cressida stepped forward just enough for the hem of her gown to avoid a patch of damp stone. No one wishes to distress you, Mara. But you must understand how grave this is. His Grace's seal cannot be treated as misplaced ribbon or household gossip. Her voice was gentle. That made the insult smoother. Of course, my lady. You were near the north study yesterday. I was sent to clean the corridor. And you observed matters there with unusual attention, Moorleigh added. Mara looked at him. I observed what was in front of me, sir. A useful habit, until it becomes ambition. Mrs. Keene lifted her keys. They chimed once in the silence. Your trunk will be opened. The world narrowed to the sound of those keys. Mara felt it as one feels the first drop of rain before a storm breaks. Every servant had a trunk. Some held ribbons, cheap combs, letters, stockings darned beyond usefulness, a prayer book, a coin wrapped in cloth, a dead mother's keepsake, or nothing at all but the proof that a servant owned a square of privacy no wider than a folded blanket. A trunk was not wealth. It was the last little country of the self. Mrs. Keene, Mara said carefully, may I ask whether His Grace has ordered this? His Grace has ordered that the seal be found. That is not what I asked. The room stiffened. Mrs. Keene's face changed color. You forget yourself. Mara's heart beat hard, but her voice did not rise. No. I remember exactly what I am. That is why I asked to speak before His Grace if I am to be accused. Lady Cressida's brows lifted with delicate surprise. My dear girl, no one has accused you yet. Grim made a low sound in his chest. Not loud. Enough. Cressida's gaze flicked toward him, and for the first time Mara saw irritation break through the polish. Moorleigh gave a weary sigh. If you are innocent, you will welcome the chance to remove doubt. Innocence does not make shame harmless, sir. Nor does clever speech make theft less likely. Mrs. Keene turned to two upper maids. Bring her trunk. Mara did not move as the girls hurried away. Bess's face had gone white. Tom stared at the floor. Cook looked furious and helpless, which amounted to the same thing below stairs. Grim stood so close that Mara felt the warmth of him through her skirt. She did not touch him. She would not give them one more thing to name as improper. The trunk arrived scuffed from the attic room where junior maid slept under the eaves. It was small, black, and plain, with one cracked leather strap and a brass lock her father had once mended with wire so fine that even Mrs. Keene had admired it before knowing whose hand had done the work. Mara gave over the key. Mrs. Keene opened the trunk herself. On top lay 2 spare aprons, a folded shawl, a pair of stockings, a worn prayer book, and a packet of letters tied now with twine because the blue ribbon was gone. Beneath them was nothing that did not belong to an honest poor woman. For one moment, Mara allowed herself breath. Then Mrs. Keene lifted the shawl. A few coins slid from the fold and struck the bottom of the trunk with a bright, accusing sound. Mara stared at them. 3 shillings and a sixpence. More loose money than she had kept in one place since entering service. Beside them lay a scrap of blue ribbon, cut crudely, its edge too fresh, its color close enough to mock the faded strip on Grim's paw. The room seemed to tilt, but Mara did not sway. Bessie whispered, "Oh, Mara." Mara did not look at her. She looked at the coins. Then at the ribbon. Then at Moorleigh, whose expression had become professionally sad. "That is not mine," Mara said. Mrs. Keene picked up the ribbon scrap with 2 fingers. "It is remarkably similar." "Similar is not the same." "And the coins?" "Not mine." Moorleigh stepped closer. Grim's head lowered. The steward halted, but only a fraction. A maid who receives secret payment might not record it in her little household accounts. "I keep no household accounts, sir." "Because you cannot." "Because I have little enough to count." A few servants looked away then. Poverty embarrassed them when it spoke plainly. Lady Cressida sighed with beautiful regret. This grows sadder. A clever young woman of reduced birth, placed among objects beyond her reach, flattered perhaps by unusual notice. It would be charitable to ask whether temptation overcame judgment. Mara lifted her gaze to the lady's face. Charity does not usually begin by arranging an audience. The servants' hall went so still that the kitchen fire seemed indecently loud. Mrs. Keene snapped the trunk lid half closed. "Enough. You will hold your tongue. I will speak before His Grace. You are in no position to demand anything. Then I will ask." Mara's hands trembled once. She folded them before her apron so no one would see. "But I will not confess to what I did not do." Moorleigh's eyes cooled. No one has mentioned confession. Everyone has prepared for it. Grim suddenly stepped forward. Not toward Mrs. Keene. Toward Moorleigh. His growl filled the hall from floor to ceiling, deep, restrained, unmistakable. Benches scraped back. Moorleigh's hand tightened around the ledger until the knuckles paled. "Control that animal," he said. Mara did not command Grim. She only said softly, "No." Grim stopped. The word had been spoken to the dog, but it landed elsewhere. No. Not a scream. Not rebellion. A boundary. Lady Cressida observed Mara as if seeing, at last, the true inconvenience beneath the quiet exterior. Before Mrs. Keene could speak again, the door at the far end of the hall opened. The Duke of Harrowmere entered without a hat, without announcement, and without any sign that he had hurried, though Phelps hovered behind him breathless enough to betray the truth. The room rose as one body. Even Lady Cressida inclined her head. Mara remained standing beside her open trunk, the coins bright against the dull wood and the false ribbon scrap in Mrs. Keene's hand. The Duke took in the scene. He looked first at Mara. Then at the trunk. Then at Grim, who stood between Mara and Moorleigh with every inch of him declaring a judgment no human being had earned the right to ignore. "Who ordered this?" the Duke asked. Mrs. Keene curtsied deeply. "Your Grace, we were acting to recover the seal." "That was not my question." Mrs. Keene faltered. Moorleigh stepped in with practiced calm. "Your Grace, time is of consequence. The seal could be used to authorize mischief if taken beyond the house." Given Miss Ellery's proximity to the study and the discovery of unexplained coins, Mrs. Keene proceeded with reasonable caution. Reasonable caution does not require an audience. The Duke's voice cut the room clean. Nor does it require searching a woman's private trunk before I have questioned her. Lady Cressida moved with soft concern. "Alastair, surely you see how painful this is for everyone. No one enjoys suspecting a servant. Then no one should enjoy watching it." Her mouth closed. The Duke came to the trunk. He did not touch its contents. That mattered to Mara more than she expected. He looked at the coins, the ribbon scrap, and the packet of her mother's letters tied with plain twine. His gaze lingered there only a moment, but she saw him understand the absence of the original ribbon. "Miss Ellery," he said. "Did you place those coins in your trunk?" "No, Your Grace." "Did you take my seal?" "No, Your Grace." "Did you cut that ribbon?" "No, Your Grace." "Do you know who did?" The answer was dangerous because suspicion had a shape, and its shape stood with a ledger under his arm. Mara felt every eye waiting. She could accuse and be dismissed as spiteful. She could stay silent and be buried under planted proof. "I know only that the ribbon on Grim's paw was mine," she said. "The piece in Mrs. Keene's hand was not cut by me." "That is not an answer," Moorleigh said. The Duke turned his head. "I will decide what answers satisfy me." Moorleigh bowed. "Of course, Your Grace." But his jaw tightened. The Duke looked back to Mara. "You asked to speak before me." "Yes, Your Grace." "Speak." Mara drew one careful breath. "I was sent to the North Corridor. I saw Mr. Moorleigh leave the study with a sealed packet and place it near the coal scuttle. When Phelps searched, it was gone. I found a burnt scrap in the ashpan with part of the word kennel. I gave it to you. I have not entered the study. I have not taken your seal. And I have no reason to hide coins in the only place every servant knows would be searched first." A murmur passed through the room before Mrs. Keene silenced it. The Duke did not move. Moorleigh gave a short, humorless laugh. "A tidy story, Your Grace. She admits to watching, to removing a scrap of paper, and to withholding information until pressed. Such conduct is hardly innocent." Mara looked at the Duke then. She did not plead. She would not. "Your Grace may doubt me," she said. "But I will not make your doubt easier by lying against myself." The word struck him. She saw it. Not on his face, which remained controlled, but in the pause before he answered. "Close the trunk," he said. Mrs. Keene blinked. "Your Grace?" "Close it." The housekeeper obeyed. Miss Ellery will not be further searched. The coins and ribbon will remain where they are until I have seen them properly. No servant is to repeat this matter beyond this hall. No one is to lay a hand on Grim. No one is to question Miss Ellery except in my presence. Cressida's voice was soft. You are very trusting. No, the Duke said. I am very tired of conclusions arranged before facts arrive. Silence followed. It did not feel like victory. Not to Mara. Her trunk had been opened. Her letters exposed. Her name passed from mouth to mouth with a taste of theft upon it. The Duke had stopped the worst of it, but he had not cleared her. Not yet. Grim turned his head and touched his muzzle to her wrist. The gesture was so gentle that the servants who had been afraid of him looked almost ashamed of themselves. Moorleigh saw it and looked away first. The Duke saw it too. His expression darkened, not with anger at her, but with something colder and more dangerous. Until I know who lies, he said, no one leaves Moorleigh. Then he turned and walked out, carrying with him the weight of a command that settled over the house like locked iron. Behind him, Lady Cressida's gaze remained on Mara. It was no longer merely amused. It was watchful. Mara stood beside her closed trunk, her hands empty, her dignity bruised but not surrendered, while Grim guarded her as if the whole house had become a threat. By late afternoon, Moorleigh Hall had become a house that listened to itself. Doors closed more softly. Footsteps slowed before corners. Servants carried trays as if the silver upon them might accuse the wrong person if tilted. The Duke's command that no one leave the estate had fallen below stairs like a lock turned on every soul beneath its roof, and yet dinner still had to be served, fires laid, wine decanted, lamps trimmed, and faces arranged into obedience. Great houses did not stop because truth had gone missing. They merely polished the surface more fiercely. Mara Ellery spent the hours before dinner in a quiet state beyond fear. Fear had been sharp in the servants' hall when her trunk lay open. This was different. This was the waiting that came after one had said the truth aloud and discovered it did not immediately save her. She moved through her duties with Grim never far away, though Phelps trailed them under the Duke's order, red-eared and miserable at being turned into a witness. Begging your pardon, he muttered while Mara folded napkins in the lower passage, but if he decides to sit in the dining room again, I'm not the man to stop him. Mara did not look up. I did not ask you to stop him. No, but His Grace did ask me to stand present, and there's a difference between standing present and being eaten present. Grim opened one eye. Phelps went silent. Despite everything, the corner of Mara's mouth almost moved. Almost. Then Mrs. Keene swept in and killed even that small human impulse with a glance. The dinner guests have arrived, she said. Sir Lionel and Mrs. Partridge, Reverend Alder, Mr. Voss the solicitor, and Lady Cressida's friends from Ravensbank Lodge. There will be no error tonight. No delay. No display. Her eyes rested on Mara. You will remain in the service passage unless called. Yes, Mrs. Keene. If the animal follows you toward the dining room, you will send him away. Mara looked at Grim, who looked back with grave indifference to management. I will try. You will do more than try. Yes, Mrs. Keene. But by the time the soup had been cleared and the fish course prepared, Grim had vanished from the boot room where Phelps swore he had seen him only a minute earlier. The first warning came not as a bark, but as a cry from the stable yard. A footman burst through the green baize door, face white, one hand pressed to his sleeve. The dog, he gasped. Grim's loose again. He's gone toward the dinner steps. Every servant froze. Mrs. Keene turned toward Mara as if the news had been carried by her own hands. Mara felt the look before she saw it. I have been here, she said. Phelps. The undergroom came through behind the footman, breathless and panicked. She has, Mrs. Keene. She's been here. That should have helped. It did not. A commotion rose beyond the passage, sharper than dinner conversation, lower than screaming. Chairs moved. A woman cried out. Mara ran before anyone ordered her not to. She should not have. A maid did not run toward the front of the house during dinner. A maid did not appear where guests might see distress before it had been turned into explanation. But Grim was out there, and the sound that came from the terrace was not rage. It was confusion. She knew the difference now. The dining room door stood open. Candlelight spilled across the marble hall. At the far end, the dinner steps led down toward the gravel sweep and the stable path beyond. Grim stood at the foot of those steps, enormous and dark against the lamps, his head low, his breath harsh. A smear of raw meat lay on the gravel near him, dark with sauce or blood, and his muzzle was stained from it. His eyes rolled once toward the light, unfocused, distressed, not savage. Guests crowded near the threshold but kept a careful distance. Sir Lionel clutched the back of a chair with more dignity than courage. Mrs. Partridge held a handkerchief to her mouth. Reverend Alder stood between two frightened ladies. The Duke was already on the steps, one hand lifted, his voice low. "Grim. Stay." The wolfhound trembled. That frightened Mara more than any growl could have done. Grim did not tremble. He endured. Cressida stood near the dining room door, pale and perfect, one hand pressed to her heart. "He came straight at the footman," she said. "Straight at him. I saw it." The young footman displayed his sleeve, where a narrow scrape showed more torn cloth than injury. "He would have had my arm, my lady, if I hadn't pulled back." Grim made a strangled sound and turned his head toward Mara. In that instant, every face followed his gaze. Mara stopped halfway across the hall. She had forgotten she still wore her work apron. She had forgotten that guests had not seen her since the glove incident. She remembered only when silence opened around her and filled itself with meaning. Lady Cressida's eyes widened with delicate horror. "There," she whispered. "You see? He looks for her." Moorleigh stepped from near the side wall, as if he had been waiting for the cue. "Your Grace, it may be necessary to ask what influence Miss Ellery has encouraged over the animal." The Duke did not turn. His attention remained on Grim. "Not now. With respect, Your Grace, now may be the only proper moment." Moorleigh reached toward the side table where Mara's service apron had been laid earlier when she carried folded napkins. He lifted it with 2 fingers and shook it once. A small twist of paper fell to the polished floor. It landed near the Duke's boot. The sound was almost nothing. The effect was complete. Mrs. Keene pressed a hand to her lips. Phelps whispered, "No." Mara stared at the paper. It was folded in the same neat, narrow style she had seen near the north study. Her stomach went cold. Moorleigh bent and picked it up. "A powder, Your Grace." He opened the twist slightly and sniffed with careful revulsion. "From the stable stores, unless I am much mistaken. A draught used to quiet difficult horses, though in the wrong measure it may distress them badly." Grim stumbled one step. The Duke moved with him, still calm, still controlled, but the line of his jaw had hardened. "Phelps," he said. "Fresh water. Now. And no one touches that meat." Phelps ran. Cressida's voice trembled beautifully. "Alastair, this is beyond eccentricity. A servant cannot be permitted to make experiments upon your household." Mara looked at her. "I did not." The words were quiet. Too quiet for the room, perhaps, but the Duke heard them. His eyes came to her at last. "Did you place that paper in your apron?" "No, Your Grace." "Did you feed Grim anything?" "No." "Did you know of any powder?" "No." Each answer cost more than the last because the evidence lay in Moorleigh's hand, and Grim stood before them all, distressed and stained, turned toward her as if she were the one place in the room that did not burn. Sir Lionel murmured, "Devilish strange business." Mrs. Partridge whispered, "The dog follows her like a familiar." Reverend Alder said sharply, "Mrs. Partridge." But the word had already found the room. "Familiar." Mara felt it move among them, old fear dressed in polite society's clothing. A maid with a beast. A ribbon. A missing seal. A packet. A powder. It was not proof. It was worse than proof. It was a story. Lady Cressida lowered her eyes. "I would rather be wrong, Your Grace." "Truly. But one cannot deny what one sees." Mara wanted to say that people denied what they saw every day. They had seen Grim's wound and called him dangerous. They had seen her father's poverty and called it failure. They had seen her open trunk and called planted coins temptation. Yet her voice caught beneath the weight of the hall. Grim took another unsteady step toward her. Several guests recoiled. The Duke said, "Stay." Grim stopped, but his body shook. Mara moved before permission could be granted. "Your Grace, he is frightened." "Miss Ellery, remain where you are." It was not cruel. It was command. It struck her harder than cruelty would have done because it came from the one person who had seemed, for 2 impossible days, to see more than her apron. Mara stopped. The distance between her and Grim was no more than 12 feet. It felt like a field in winter. Phelps returned with water, and the Duke guided the bowl toward Grim with a patience that held the room in place. The wolfhound drank, then turned again toward Mara, whining low in his throat. "You see?" Cressida whispered. "Even now." Moorleigh held the paper twist higher. "Your Grace, I must advise that Miss Ellery be kept apart from the animal and from the household until this is examined. The safety of your guests requires it." The Duke looked at the paper. Then at Grim. Then at Mara. For the first time, uncertainty remained long enough for everyone to witness. Mara saw it and felt something inside her fold inward, not breaking, not yet, but learning pain's newest shape. "Do you believe I would hurt him?" she asked. The question was not loud. It did not need to be. The Duke's face changed, almost imperceptibly. He wanted to answer. She saw that. But wanting did not become trust quickly enough. His silence lasted one breath too long. Lady Cressida looked down, as if compassion moved her. Moorleigh's expression settled into solemn satisfaction. Mara understood then how accusation triumphed. Not by proving guilt at once, but by forcing innocence to stand in a pause where trust should have been. At last the Duke said, "I will not defend what I cannot yet prove." The words were measured. They were reasonable. They were devastating. Grim lowered himself onto the gravel with a heavy, exhausted sound, still facing Mara. The guests watched. The servants watched from the edges of the hall. Mara did not cry. That would have pleased too many people. She curtsied because rank still existed, even when justice faltered. "Then I hope proof arrives before harm does, Your Grace." His eyes sharpened at that, as if she had placed a blade gently into his hand and closed his fingers around it. Mrs. Keene moved behind Mara. "Come." Mara allowed herself to be guided toward the morning room, not dragged, not seized, not enough to make the scene uglier than it already was. At the doorway, she looked back once. Grim had lifted his head. With effort that seemed to pain him, he dragged himself a little closer across the gravel, not toward the Duke, not toward the guests, but toward her. The faded blue ribbon on his paw caught the lamplight for a single second. Then the morning room door closed, and the hall's judgment became a muffled sound on the other side. Mara stood alone beneath a portrait of some long-dead duchess and pressed her hands together until they stopped trembling. Beyond the door, voices rose and fell. A lady murmured scandal. A man mentioned danger. Moorleigh spoke in tones too low to hear. Then came the Duke's voice, clear enough to pass through oak. "No one is to touch her. No one is to question her without me." It was protection. It was not trust. And for the first time since Grim had placed his wounded head in her palm, Mara wondered whether the difference might ruin them both. The morning room held Mara through the worst hour of her life with the indifferent elegance of carved chairs, pale wallpaper, and a clock that ticked as if time had no opinion on disgrace. She stood at first because sitting felt too much like accepting judgment. Then her knees weakened, and she lowered herself onto the edge of a chair beneath the portrait of the dead duchess, hands folded so tightly that her fingers ached. Outside the door, the house moved in fragments. A footman's hurried step. Mrs. Keene's clipped whisper. Lady Cressida's voice, soft enough to seem kind and clear enough to wound. Somewhere beyond the hall, Grim made one low, distressed sound. Mara closed her eyes. She had been accused before dinner guests. That was the fact of it. Not merely suspected below stairs, not merely mocked in the service passage, but placed before ladies and gentlemen like an object lesson in what happened when a maid forgot her place. The Duke had not called her guilty. He had not allowed anyone to touch her. He had said no one might question her without him. Yet the words that remained were not those. The words that remained were, "I will not defend what I cannot yet prove." Proof. As if she had not stood before him with empty hands. As if Grimm's trust meant nothing without silver, paper, and the approval of men who kept ledgers. The door opened at last. Alastair Renford entered alone, then stopped just inside the threshold and left the door half open behind him. That, Mara understood, was deliberate. Propriety survived even when kindness limped. He had removed his evening coat. His waistcoat was still immaculate, but his face looked less carved than before, as though the night had taken something from him and not returned it. "Miss Ellery," he said. Mara rose. "Your Grace." His gaze moved to her hands. Perhaps he saw how they trembled before she hid them in her skirt. "Grimm has taken water. Phelps is with him. The meat has been removed, and no one has touched the powder. Thank you for telling me." The politeness of her own answer hurt her. It sounded like distance because it was. The Duke heard it. "I do not believe you harmed him." The words came too late to be simple. Mara looked at him then. "But you did not say that where they could hear you." A pause followed. He accepted the blow because it was true. No, why? Because belief is not proof. She drew one breath, slow and careful. And proof is easier to respect when it belongs to someone important. His expression tightened. "You think I wish to shame you?" "No, Your Grace. I think you wish to prevent disorder. I think you wish to protect your guests, your house, your name, and perhaps even me. But I was the only thing in that hall small enough to move aside." He looked away for a moment. The room seemed to deepen around his silence. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "If I defended you beyond what I could establish, they would say you held influence over me. They would say worse of you than they already have." Mara gave a sad little smile. "They are saying it anyway. That is why I have made a decision." Her chest tightened before he said the rest. She knew decisions made by powerful people. They arrived dressed as necessity and left others to carry the cost. "You will leave Moorleigh temporarily," he said. "Tonight." The words entered softly. They did not need force. "Leave," she repeated. "Not dismissed. Not without reference. You will be taken by carriage to the vicarage. Mrs. Alder will receive you. I have already sent a note. You will be safer there while I conduct the inquiry." "Safer?" Mara looked at the open door, at the lamplight beyond it, at the house that had become danger in the shape of polished wood and lowered eyes. "Will they know I am not dismissed?" "Mrs. Keene will be told." "That was not my question." He faced her again. For the first time, she saw frustration break through his control, not anger with her, but with the impossible geometry of class, scandal, and suspicion. "The household will know you remain under my protection." "Protection," she said. The word felt cold in her mouth. "Not trust." His jaw tightened. Mara. It was the first time he had used her Christian name. There was no intimacy in it. Only strain. Yet it struck her with such force that she almost looked away. "Forgive me," he said at once. "Miss Ellery." She should have been grateful for the correction. Instead, she felt the loss of the mistake. "Your Grace, may I ask one thing before I go?" "Yes." "Do not call it safety in front of them." He stared at her. "What would you have me call it? What it will look like?" Her voice remained steady because she had placed all her shaking somewhere too deep to reach. "Removal." The clock ticked once. Twice. "I will find who did this," he said. "Then find them quickly." It was not insolent. It was not meek. It stood between them like a candle that refused to go out. He bowed his head a fraction, and then Mrs. Keene appeared at the open doorway with a face arranged into triumph too carefully hidden to be called triumph. Behind her, Lady Cressida stood farther back in the hall, pale and composed, her hand at her throat as if the entire matter pained her delicate spirit. "Miss Ellery is to pack a small valise," the Duke said. "She will be conveyed to the vicarage under my instruction. She is not dismissed. No servant is to say otherwise. Mrs. Keene curtsied. As your grace commands. Lady Cressida stepped forward. Alastair, are you certain the vicarage is wise? Kindness may be misunderstood in such circumstances. A clean dismissal, with a modest sum and no reference until matters are settled, might spare everyone further discomfort. Mara felt the floor steady beneath her. There it was. The true shape of charity. Money in exchange for disappearance. Silence made affordable. The Duke's eyes turned dark. Miss Ellery will have a reference if she ever requires one. Even now? Cressida asked softly. Especially now. The answer silenced her for only a heartbeat, but Mara treasured that heartbeat with a foolishness she could not afford. Then the housekeeper led her back below stairs, and the heartbeat ended. The servants' hall did not stop when Mara entered. That was how she knew the news had already gone through it. People continued their tasks too carefully. A knife scraped bread. A cup was set down without sound. Bessie stood near the hearth with red eyes and did not dare approach. Mara went to the attic room where her trunk had been returned after its violation. She packed as little as she could. One spare apron, though she did not know whether she would wear it again. Her shawl. Her prayer book. Her mother's letters, retied with rough twine. The false coins remained in the housekeeper's keeping, along with the cut ribbon scrap. Her own ribbon remained with Grim. That was the one thing no one had yet managed to take from its proper place. Mrs. Keene stood by the door as if Mara might hide a silver candlestick in a folded stocking. You should be grateful, she said. Mara closed the valise. For being sent away. For not being thrown out. Mara turned the small brass key in the lock. I have noticed that people often call it gratitude when they mean silence. Mrs. Keene's eyes flashed. You have become very bold since His Grace noticed you. Mara lifted the valise. It was light. That hurt in a way she had not expected. A life could be carried in one hand when the world had never allowed it to grow. No, she said. I have only become tired. Below, the back passage was lined with faces pretending not to watch. Tom held his cap in both hands. Cook stared fiercely into an empty pot. Bessie stepped forward at last, then stopped when Mrs. Keene looked at her. Mara saved her the trouble. Good night, Bessie. Bessie's mouth trembled. It's not right. Do not get yourself punished for saying so. But it isn't. That small refusal, from a girl who feared everything, nearly undid Mara more than accusation had. She nodded once and walked on. The carriage waited not at the front steps, which would have made too much statement, nor fully at the service yard, which would have looked like expulsion, but at the side entrance between worlds. The Duke had chosen the place carefully. Mara saw that and wished she did not understand him so well. Grim's howl came from the kennel yard before she reached the door. It rose through the damp night, rough with confusion, and cut through every servant's guarded face. Mara stopped. Phelps stood by the kennel gate, both hands white around the latch. He won't settle, he called miserably. He's been like this since she came down. The Duke stood beside the carriage, hatless in the rain. He had a dark cloak over one arm. Bring him no farther, he ordered Phelps, though the word seemed to cost him. Mara walked to the carriage. He offered the cloak. She did not take it. Instead, she drew a folded white handkerchief from her sleeve. His handkerchief. She had forgotten it until she packed, tucked between her mother's letters from the day he had given it after the dining room insult. She held it out. This belongs to your grace. He looked at it. Keep it. No, the word was gentle, but final. Kindness without trust is still distance, your grace. I have carried enough distance. Rain tapped softly on the carriage roof. His hand closed around the handkerchief, slowly. Miss Ellery. I did not hurt him, she said. I know. She searched his face. No. You hope. For once, he had no answer. That silence was its own confession. Mara climbed into the carriage without his help. Properly. Carefully. Like a maid who knew every eye remained upon her. As the door closed, Grim howled again, and this time the sound broke into something lower, almost human in its grief. The carriage rolled forward. Through the rain-blurred window, Mara saw the servants gathered in the side passage, Lady Cressida watching from an upper window, and the Duke standing alone with her returned handkerchief in his hand. He looked like a man who had protected the wrong thing and understood it one moment too late. Then Moorleigh Hall slipped behind the dark, and Mara held her valise on her knees as if it were the last honest proof that she had not vanished completely. The vicarage stood less than 2 miles from Moorleigh Hall, but by the time Mara arrived, it felt as though the carriage had carried her into another life. It was a square stone house beside the churchyard, with ivy over one wall and a lamp burning in the lower window. Mrs. Alder opened the door herself, dressed in black wool with a shawl pinned firmly at her breast, her grey hair braided beneath a plain cap. She was the Reverend Alder's widowed sister, and her face possessed the rare mercy of not pretending surprise was kindness. She took in Mara's valise, the wet hem of her dress, and the carriage retreating into the night. Then she stepped aside. Come in before the rain decides to finish what the house began. Mara crossed the threshold. Thank you, madam. Mrs. Alder will do. His Grace's note was brief, which means either the matter is simple or a man has written it. Despite everything, Mara almost smiled. Mrs. Alder saw that near smile and did not chase it. She led Mara to a small room behind the parlour, gave her tea, dry stockings, and silence. That last gift was the finest. No one asked whether she had stolen the seal. No one asked why a duke had sent a maid to the vicarage after dark. No one used sympathy like a needle. Mara sat by the kitchen fire with her hands around the cup and let the warmth tell her body what her mind still could not believe. She had left Moorleigh. Grim was behind her? The Duke had said he hoped, not knew. In the morning, the rain had passed, leaving the churchyard washed clean and the moor beyond it dark with damp heather. Mara woke before the household bell that did not exist there. Habit pulled her upright in the narrow bed, and for one confused moment she reached for an apron she no longer needed to wear. Then she remembered. The vicarage room was plain, with a small washstand, a wooden chair, and a window overlooking the back gate. Her valise sat where she had placed it. Her mother's letters lay beneath her shawl. Nothing had been opened while she slept. The decency of that nearly brought tears, so she folded the shawl twice and refused them. Mrs. Alder found her in the kitchen washing her own cup. I have a girl who comes in for that, the older woman said. I am used to doing it. So are many people. It doesn't always mean they must. Mara set the cup down. I do not wish to be idle. Then shell peas after breakfast. It is honest labor and unlikely to accuse anyone of theft. This time Mara did smile, briefly. It faded when a sound came from outside. A scrape at the back gate. Then a low whine. The cup slipped in Mara's wet hand and struck the basin with a dull crack. She was at the door before Mrs. Alder could speak. Grim stood beyond the gate, soaked with rain and mud, his great head lowered, his sides moving with exhaustion. The faded blue ribbon still circled his injured paw, though it was dark now with wet. There was a fresh tangle of grass and twine caught in a long fur beneath his shoulder, and his eyes fixed upon Mara with such weary relief that the last wall she had built around herself fell without a sound. "Oh, you foolish creature," she whispered. "You shouldn't have come." Grim pushed his muzzle against the gate. Mrs. Alder appeared behind her. "I take it this is the cause of half the county's conversation. His name is Grim." "Of course it is." The older woman unlatched the gate with admirable composure. "Bring him in before my brother sees him and tries to greet him like a parishioner." Grim stepped into the yard and went straight to Mara, leaning his weight against her skirts as if the journey had used all the strength left in him. Mara guided him to the stable shed behind the vicarage, where Mrs. Alder fetched old towels and a bowl of water. "I should send word to His Grace," the widow said. "Yes." Mara knelt beside Grim and began working mud from his fur. "Please." Her fingers found the twine near his shoulder. It had twisted deep beneath the outer coat, snagged with a bit of torn sacking and something stiff that smelled faintly bitter, like the stable draught Moorleigh had described. Mara stilled. "Mrs. Alder." The older woman bent closer. "What is it?" This was not on him before. Carefully, Mara untangled the twine. A tiny scrap of paper clung to it, softened by rain but not destroyed. The fold was narrow and precise. She had seen that fold before in the north corridor. Her pulse quickened, but fear did not take her this time. Fear had exhausted its claim. "May I have a clean cloth?" she asked. Mrs. Alder brought one. Mara placed the twine and paper upon it, then looked at Grim's muzzle. The stain from the raw meat had faded, but the bitter smell remained near the fur beneath his jaw, where someone had likely smeared or tied the bait. He did not run wild, Mara said. He followed what was put before him. "Can you prove that?" "Not alone." Mrs. Alder looked at her for a long moment. "Then it is fortunate you are not alone." The Duke arrived within the hour on horseback, without retinue, though a groom from Moorleigh rode at a respectful distance behind him. He dismounted before the vicarage gate and removed his hat when Mrs. Alder stepped outside, which made her eyebrows lift a fraction, as if courtesy from powerful men was pleasant but not astonishing enough to excuse their errors. Mara stood beneath the lintel of the stable shed, her sleeves rolled to the wrist, her apron borrowed from Mrs. Alder and too short by 2 inches. Grim lay behind her, calmer now, his head upon his paws. The Duke's eyes went first to the dog. Then to Mara. Something in his face changed when he saw that Grim had come to her and not home. "Miss Ellery," he said. She curtsied. "Your Grace." The distance between them was only a few yards. It felt carefully measured by everything neither of them could say. Mrs. Alder remained in the yard with a basket of peas on her arm, positioning herself with such practical dignity that propriety stood beside Mara like a second witness. "He broke the kennel sometime after midnight," the Duke said. "Phelps found the latch forced. I had men searching the moor road before dawn. He came here. So I see." His voice carried no accusation, only a tiredness that made him look suddenly younger and older at once. "May I examine him?" Mara stepped aside. "Yes, Your Grace." Grim lifted his head when the Duke approached, but he did not rise. The Duke crouched slowly and laid one hand near the dog's neck, not upon him at first. He waited until Grim accepted the touch. Mara watched that restraint and felt an ache she disliked. He could be careful. He knew how. That was what made last night hurt more, not less. "Mrs. Alder sent word that you found something," he said. Mara took the clean cloth from a stool and held it out. The twine was caught beneath his shoulder. "There is paper with it. The smell is the same as the powder Mr. Moorleigh found in my apron. I believe someone tied or smeared bait for him to follow." The Duke took the cloth by the corners. This time he was careful not to brush her fingers. "You recognized the fold?" "Yes." "From the packet you saw near the north study?" "Yes, Your Grace." He looked at the damp paper. "And you still brought this to me?" Mara met his eyes. "I brought it to the truth. You are the only person with power enough to make anyone listen to it." The answer struck him more deeply than praise would have done. He rose. "I owe you an apology." Mrs. Alder's hand slowed over the peas, but she did not look up. Mara did not move. "Yes, Your Grace." The honesty of that answer seemed to surprise him. Perhaps he had expected refusal. Perhaps women of her station were expected to make forgiveness easy because resentment was too expensive. Mara had no money for resentment either, but she had learned that dignity cost less than surrender. "I was wrong," he said. "Not to doubt that evidence mattered, but to leave you standing alone while I measured it." The yard went very still. Beyond the hedge, the church bell gave one soft quarter-hour note. Mara's throat tightened. "Thank you. That is not enough." No, his eyes lifted to hers. "Tell me what is." The question was not command. That was new. Mara looked back toward Grim, who had closed his eyes again, trusting the shed, the yard, and the woman who had followed his pain before anyone believed her own. "If shame is public," she said, "truth must not be private." The Duke's face altered. Not softened. Set. "Then it will not be." For the first time since the carriage rolled away from Moorleigh, Mara felt something steadier than hope. Hope fluttered. This did not. This was resolve, and it belonged to her as much as to him. "I am not asking to return as though nothing happened," she said. Nothing happened as it should have. And I am not asking you to return for my comfort. His voice lowered. I am asking whether, when the time comes, you will stand before those who heard you accused and speak what you know. Mrs. Alder looked up then. Mara heard the question beneath the question. Would she walk back into the house that had stripped open her trunk? Would she face Cressida's silk courtesy, Moorleigh's records, Mrs. Keene's cold pride, and the guests who had learned to look at her as scandal? Her hands wanted to tremble. She let them. Then she folded them calmly. Yes, she said. But not because you ask it. A faint shadow crossed his mouth, almost sorrow and almost admiration. Why, then? Mara looked at Grim. Because he is innocent too. The Duke followed her gaze to the wolfhound, and for one moment the title, the estate, the scandal, and every polished cruelty of Moorleigh Hall seemed to fall away from him. Only a man remained, looking at the creature that had once belonged to his brother and had now chosen a maid no one had believed quickly enough. My brother used to say Grim would follow the first person in a room who did not lie to him, he said. Mara spoke gently. Then perhaps your brother knew him well. The Duke's hand closed around the cloth with the twine. I am returning to Moorleigh. Moorleigh will open the estate accounts today. Will he? The question came before Mara could stop it. The Duke's gaze sharpened, not at her, but with her. If he does not, that will answer almost as much as the accounts. Mrs. Alder nodded once, approving despite herself. At last, a sensible sentence. The Duke bowed to her. Madam. She sniffed. Do not bow to me. Do better by her. He looked back at Mara. I intend to. Mara wanted to believe him. She did not yet. That was the honest shape of her heart. Still, when he turned to leave, she took one step forward. Your Grace. He stopped. Yes? Grim should not be put back in the kennel with the same latch. He will not be. And Phelps should not be blamed for losing him last night. He will not be. And if Mr. Moorleigh says the accounts are too delicate for servants' ears, he will mean they are too dangerous for yours. The Duke held her gaze. You have thought carefully. I have had little else to do but remember what others hoped I would forget. He bowed his head, not as a duke to a maid, but as one person receiving a truth from another. Then remember everything. He rode away with the cloth tucked inside his coat, the groom following behind. Mara stood at the gate until hoofbeats faded toward Moorleigh. Grim slept in the shed, safe for the moment. Mrs. Alder came to stand beside her. You know, the widow said, truth is a troublesome guest. Once invited, it tends to rearrange the furniture. Mara looked toward the road that led back to the great house. Good, she said quietly. Some furniture has stood in the wrong place too long. By the time the Duke returned to Moorleigh Hall, Lady Cressida Vane had already begun saving him from himself. She did it beautifully. She did it with lowered lashes, folded notes, and a voice pitched to carry only as far as she wished. By noon, Mrs. Partridge had heard that His Grace had ridden alone to the vicarage in pursuit of a dismissed maid. By luncheon, Sir Lionel understood that the Duke's judgment had been troubled ever since his brother's death. By 2 o'clock, Reverend Alder had received, from 3 separate mouths, the suggestion that compassion for servants was admirable only when it did not cloud rank, inheritance, and safety. And by 3, Lady Cressida had arranged a charity subscription meeting in the Great Hall for the following day, inviting the remaining house guests, 2 neighbouring families from Ravensbank Lodge, the vicar, Mr. Voss the solicitor, and several tenant representatives whose presence would make the gathering look moral rather than political. A public good, she said to Mrs. Partridge in the drawing-room, while sunlight lay pale across the carpet. His Grace has always cared for the estate, of course. Yet after recent disturbances, it may comfort the county to see Moorleigh guided by steadier influences. You mean yourself, Mrs. Partridge said, less foolish than she often sounded. Cressida smiled. I mean the dukedom. Across the room, Mr. Moorleigh stood near the writing table with a portfolio beneath one arm. His face remained composed, but his eyes had acquired the strained watchfulness of a man hearing footsteps behind a locked door. The Duke had requested the ledgers within an hour of returning. Requested was the word used above stairs. Below stairs, Phelps said His Grace had looked at Moorleigh and made the air freeze. Moorleigh had bowed, promised full cooperation, and then spent the next 2 hours moving between his office, the north study, and the old muniment room with increasing speed and decreasing calm. Cressida noticed. She noticed everything useful. When the drawing-room entered briefly before tea, she crossed to him and spoke without moving her lips much. "How much can he find?" Morley's fingers tightened on the portfolio. "Not enough if I am given time." "You had time." Before a maid began reading Ashes. Her eyes sharpened. "Do not blame the maid for your untidiness. Do not underestimate her memory." Cressida looked toward the window, beyond which the moor road bent toward the village and the vicarage hidden behind churchyard trees. Memory is only dangerous when someone important repeats it. The Duke has become inclined to repeat her. Then we must give him a nobler reason to stop. She turned back as voices approached the corridor. Tomorrow, he will be offered the chance to appear sensible before the county. If he refuses, he looks besotted. If he accepts, he is bound again to his rank. Moorleigh swallowed. And the accounts? Remove what must be removed. Not all. That would look desperate. Only what gives shape to suspicion. There are receipts. Then burn the wrong ones and misplace the right ones. Her smile returned as the door opened and Mrs. Partridge entered. "Tea, dear lady? I find a little warmth steadies the nerves in a house so full of feeling." At the vicarage, Ellery sat beside the kitchen table with a bowl of peas before her and listened to Mrs. Alder read the note the Duke had sent. It was brief, but not careless. The letters were firm, dark, and slanted slightly right, as if even his handwriting resisted waste. "Miss Ellery, if you are willing, Mrs. Alder will accompany you to Moorleigh Hall tomorrow at 11 o'clock. You will not be commanded to return. You will be asked to speak only what you know. I will ensure you are heard before those who heard you accused. A.W. Mrs. Alder lowered the paper. That is the sort of note written by a man trying very hard not to order while still being accustomed to it. Mara looked down at the peas in her lap. He asked. "Yes. That matters. So does what you answer." Outside, Grim slept in the stable shed, exhausted but calmer, his breath even and his wounded paw stretched forward. Mrs. Alder had cleaned the faded ribbon and retied it over fresh linen because Grim refused any arrangement that did not include it. Ridiculous creature, she had told him. Grim had closed his eyes as if accepting admiration. Mara had laughed then, softly, before remembering that laughter had no secure place in her life at the moment. Now she folded the Duke's note once along its existing crease. "If I return, they will look at me as though I have come to beg for restoration." "Will you?" "No, then let them be disappointed." Mara touched the edge of the paper. "I am afraid." "Good." Mrs. Alder sat opposite her. "Fear is information. It tells you the room matters. It tells me I was foolish to hope truth would be enough. Truth is rarely enough by itself. It needs a mouth, a witness, and occasionally a large dog with terrible manners." Mara looked toward the shed. "He should not come. Try telling him." A knock sounded at the back door before Mara could answer. She rose, but Mrs. Alder motioned her back and opened it herself. Phelps stood outside, damp from mist, cap in hand, looking as if he expected to be scolded by everyone in the parish. "Begging pardon, His Grace sent me with this for Miss Ellery." He held out a small wrapped bundle. "And to ask after Grim, though he said I'm not to trouble you if the dog is resting." Mrs. Alder took the bundle. "His Grace is learning." Phelps looked confused. "Is he? Never mind." She shut the door and brought the bundle to Mara. Inside lay a plain shawl, warm but not fine, the kind a respectable woman might wear without drawing comment. Beneath it was a second note. "For the journey only. Not a gift. A protection against rain and gossip." Mara read it twice. Her throat tightened despite herself. Mrs. Alder watched her over the rim of her spectacles. "Well." Mara folded the note and placed it beside the first. "He still thinks protection can be explained into harmlessness." "And you?" Mara laid one hand on the shawl. "I think he is trying to protect without possessing. That is better than most men manage before breakfast." The attempt at humour did not remove the weight of the decision. By evening, word reached the vicarage by way of a churchwarden's wife who pretended she had come to borrow yeast. Lady Cressida's charity gathering had become the talk of the village. Some said the Duke would announce a renewed commitment to the estate. Some said he would send the troublesome maid away properly at last. One whisper, offered with lowered eyes and great relish, suggested that Lady Cressida might soon become Duchess of Harrowmere and restore order to the house. Mrs. Alder dismissed the woman with yeast, no gossip in return, and a look that made the back gate close faster than usual. Mara stood by the window after the visitor left. If he marries her, the truth will disappear. If he intends to marry her, he is more foolish than his note suggests. She knows how the world works. So do rats. We do not put them in charge of the pantry. Mara turned from the window, startled into a laugh that faded almost at once. Mrs. Alder. I am a vicar's sister, not a stained glass cent. The older woman began folding linen with decisive hands. Now listen to me. Tomorrow you will not go to Moorleigh as a maid asking forgiveness. You will go as a woman carrying facts. There is a difference. Keep your chin steady. Do not adorn your speech. Do not answer questions that are not questions. And if Lady Cressida smiles too sweetly, remember that sugar is often used to hide medicine. Mara looked at the 2 notes on the table. What if His Grace changes his mind when everyone is watching? Mrs. Alder's hands paused. Then you will not change yours. That answer stayed with Mara through the night. She slept little. Near dawn, she woke to Grim moving outside her door. Not scratching. Not whining. Merely settling his heavy body across the threshold as if he had decided no one would reach her without stepping over him. The tenderness of it nearly undid her. She opened the door and found him looking up, solemn and enormous. I am not worth all this trouble, she whispered. Grim's tail struck the floor once. The sound was a quiet contradiction. At Moorleigh Hall, Moorleigh did not sleep either. Near midnight, he carried a candle into the muniment room and unlocked the lower cabinet where old leases, tenant receipts, and repair accounts were kept in tied bundles. He worked quickly, selecting pages by date rather than volume. Kennel repairs. Stable draft invoices. Rent abatements never received by the tenants whose names they bore. A receipt marked with the Duke's private seal before the seal had officially gone missing. His hands were steady until a floorboard moved behind him. He turned. Lady Cressida stood in the doorway, wrapped in a dark shawl, candlelight making her face look both younger and crueler. Not there, she said. If papers vanish from the muniment room, even a tired duke will smell smoke. Then where? The old grate in the east passage. Burn enough to confuse, not enough to confess. Moorleigh stared at the papers. And if he calls the maid tomorrow? He will. She saw the packet. She saw something she cannot prove. Cressida stepped closer. By tomorrow afternoon, the county will see a duke forced to choose between an unsuitable servant's word and the woman who understands his position. You speak of yourself. I speak of survival. Morley's mouth twisted. Yours or mine? Cressida smiled. Let us hope the distinction remains unnecessary. By morning, Moorleigh was bright with preparation. The great hall was opened, not for a trial, never that word, but for a charity subscription meeting. Chairs were arranged in careful rows. A table stood near the hearth with papers, ink, and subscription lists. Lady Cressida, dressed in deep blue, a color just serious enough to suggest responsibility and just flattering enough to suggest destiny. The Duke entered the hall before the guests and found her placing calling cards upon the table. You have been industrious, he said. She looked up. Someone must be. This meeting was not mine. No. It is for the estate. The estate has endured worse than gossip. Has it endured a duke who lets gossip become governance? The blow was elegant. He felt it and did not show it. You have mistaken my patience for uncertainty. Her eyes softened. Alastair, I have known you too long to mistake you. You are grieving again. That maid, the dog, Edmund's memory. It is all tangled together. Let me help you untangle it before the county sees only knots. For a moment, his face closed so completely that even Cressida could not read it. "You will not use my brother's name as a key." Her colour changed. Just enough. Then wheels sounded on the gravel outside. The first guests had arrived. At the vicarage, Mara stood in Mrs. Alder's borrowed shawl, the Duke's plain one folded over her arm for the journey. She had chosen not to wear it into the house. Protection had its place. So did proof that she could stand without being wrapped in his concern. Mrs. Alder came out with her bonnet tied firmly. Grim pushed through the gate behind them before either woman could stop him. "No," Mara said. Grim continued to the carriage and stood beside it. Mrs. Alder sighed. "I warned you. He cannot come into the great hall." I suspect Grim has not consulted the household book of etiquette. Mara looked toward the moor road, where Moorleigh Hall waited beyond stone walls, polished lies, and faces that had already decided what sort of woman she was. Her fear returned. It did not shrink. She did not either. Mrs. Alder touched her arm once. "Remember. Facts." Not pleading. Mara nodded. "Facts." She stepped into the carriage by her own strength. Grim settled outside beside the groom's seat until the driver, defeated by nobility in animal form, allowed him to follow at a steady pace. The carriage turned toward Moorleigh. By the time the towers appeared through the morning mist, Mara had stopped hoping the house would be kind. Kindness was uncertain. Truth was not. She had carried it away from Moorleigh in shame. Now she was bringing it back by choice. Moorleigh Hall did not open its front doors to Mara as if welcoming her back. It opened them because the Duke had ordered it, and a great house obeyed power long before it understood justice. The carriage stopped at the gravel sweep beneath a sky the colour of pewter. Mrs. Alder stepped down first, one gloved hand on the footman's arm, her plain black bonnet set with the determination of a woman prepared to shame an entire county if manners required it. Mara followed without assistance. She had chosen her neatest dark dress, the borrowed shawl, and no ornament except the small steadiness she had gathered during the ride. Grim came last, having trotted behind the carriage with the solemn endurance of an ancient guardian. At the sight of him, the footman at the door went pale, but he did not retreat. That, Mara thought, meant the Duke's command had reached even fear. Inside, the great hall had been arranged as if for charity, but it felt like judgment pretending to be good works. The long oak table near the hearth held ink, folded subscription lists, and several sealed envelopes. Chairs had been set for the local families. Sir Lionel and Mrs. Partridge sat near the front, both trying to look less curious than they were. Reverend Alder stood beside the hearth, his face grave when he saw his sister enter. "Mr. Voss the solicitor had placed his leather case on a side table and was sorting papers with the caution of a man who knew that property often made people less honest, not more. A few tenant representatives stood near the rear wall in their best coats, uneasy among marble, antlers, and ancestral portraits. Along the sides of the hall stood the household staff. Footmen. Maids. Cook. Phelps. Mrs. Keene, stiff and pale, her keys silent at her waist. Mr. Moorleigh waited beside the table, a portfolio under his hand. Lady Cressida stood near the Duke's chair in deep blue silk, every inch the woman society would have expected to become duchess. Then Mara entered, and expectation faltered. The silence did not fall all at once. It travelled. First through the servants, then the tenants, then the guests, until even the candle flames seemed to hold still. Mara felt every eye register what she was. Not a lady. Not a guest. Not a servant returned to duty. Something more inconvenient. A woman they had already judged and now had to see standing upright. Grim moved beside her. His injured paw still carried the cleaned bandage, and above it, the faded blue ribbon showed like a small, stubborn truth. Lady Cressida's gaze flicked to it and away. The Duke stood at the far end of the hall. Alistair Renford wore black, not mourning black, but something close enough to make his face seem carved from decision. When Mara curtsied, he bowed his head. Not deeply. Not improperly. But enough that the hall understood he had acknowledged her before she spoke. Lady Cressida's mouth tightened. "Your Grace," she said softly, "surely this is unnecessary. Miss Ellery might have been questioned privately. It would be kinder." The Duke did not look at her. She was accused publicly. The words moved through the hall with quiet force. She will be heard publicly. Mrs. Partridge shifted in her chair. Sir Lionel cleared his throat and thought better of speaking. Mr. Moorleigh gave a respectful bow. Your Grace, no one wishes to deny the girl a hearing. Grimm's head turned toward him. The steward did not flinch, but his fingers pressed harder against the portfolio. This is not a trial, the Duke said. It is an inquiry into disorder within my house, and into accusations made before guests, servants, and tenants who deserved better than rumor. His gaze moved along the wall where the household stood. No one is here to entertain themselves with shame. Anyone who cannot remember that may leave. No one left. Lady Cressida's smile returned, thinner than before. Then let us hope truth is served quickly. Mrs. Alder made a soft sound that might have been agreement and might have been contempt. Mara stood near the center of the hall, where the stone floor felt colder through her shoes than it should have. The Duke turned to her. Miss Ellery, you told me you saw Mr. Moorleigh leave the north study with a sealed packet. Yes, Your Grace. Her voice sounded small in the hall. She steadied it. He placed it behind the coal scuttle in the corridor. When Phelps searched, it was gone. Moorleigh sighed, not impatiently, but sorrowfully. A mistake, I think. I carried several account packets that morning. None were hidden. You also told Mrs. Keene the ash had been disturbed, Mara said. Morley's eye sharpened. Because it had been. There was a burnt scrap in the ash pan. It bore part of the word kennel. Mr. Voss looked up. The Duke nodded once. The scrap is in Mr. Voss's possession. The solicitor lifted a folded paper. Charred, but legible in part. Lady Cressida smiled gently. A fragment is a fragile foundation on which to build suspicion. So is a scrap of ribbon in a maid's trunk, Mrs. Alder said. Several heads turned. Reverend Alder lowered his eyes, but Mara saw the corner of his mouth move. The Duke continued before Cressida could answer. Miss Ellery also found twine and paper in Grimm's coat at the vicarage. Mr. Voss has examined the fold. It matches several packets from Mr. Morley's office. Morley's face remained calm. Many men fold paper. It is not a crime. No, Mara said. But the smell was the same as the powder found in my apron. And how often have you smelled horse drafts, Miss Ellery? Moorleigh asked. Often enough since his Grace's dog was harmed. Harmed? Cressida repeated. Or indulged by a servant who mistook an animal's preference for evidence of virtue. Mara felt the sting. She did not answer it. Mrs. Alder's warning held in her mind. Facts. Not pleading. The paper in my apron was folded as Mr. Moorleigh folds his packets, Mara said. The packet near the coal scuttle vanished before Phelps arrived. Grimm followed bait that had the same bitter scent. And the false ribbon in my trunk was cut cleanly, not torn from age as mine would have been. Convenient observations, Moorleigh said. From a girl under accusation. The Duke's gaze chilled. You will address her as Miss Ellery while she stands in this hall. A murmur passed along the servants' wall. Mara did not look at them. If she did, she feared she would see pity and lose the strength pity always threatened to steal. Moorleigh bowed. Miss Ellery, then. I ask only whether a servant eager to save herself might not remember things in a useful order. Mara turned fully toward him. A steward eager to hide himself might count on no one believing a servant's memory at all. The hall stilled. Even Grimm's ears lifted. Morley's lips parted, but no answer came quickly enough. Cressida stepped smoothly into the pause. This grows unseemly. His Grace has been generous, perhaps too generous, but must we allow resentment to dress itself as testimony? The Duke looked at her. Resentment did not put coins in her trunk. Nor has anyone proved who did. That is why we are here. Mr. Voss cleared his throat. There is also the matter of the ledgers requested this morning. Moorleigh turned. They are present. Some are. The solicitor placed one hand upon a stack of papers. Several rent entries are missing corresponding receipts. 3 payments marked as abatements were never received by the named tenants if these men are willing to confirm what they told me. At the rear, one tenant, Mr. Brackley, removed his cap. Begging your Grace's pardon, but I paid full rent for Michaelmas. There were no abatement to me. Another man nodded. Nor me. Morley's composure flickered. Confusion in copying. Estate work is complex. So is deceit, Mrs. Alder said. This time Reverend Alder murmured, Sister. What? It is. The Duke turned toward Mrs. Keene. The housekeeper had been staring at the floor, white around the mouth. Mrs. Keene. She looked up as if summoned to the scaffold. Your Grace. You told me no servant entered the north study the night the seal vanished. Yes, Your Grace. Did you see anyone near the service wing after midnight? Her eyes moved once to Moorleigh. Only once. It was enough. Mrs. Keene, the Duke said, more quietly, you will answer me. The housekeeper's hand closed around her keys. They rang faintly. I saw Mr. Moorleigh come from the service passage that night. Moorleigh snapped, Careful. The Duke's voice struck over his. You will not threaten a woman in my hall. Mrs. Keene swallowed. He said his Grace had ordered papers secured. I did not question him. I should have. Mara felt something shift in the room. Not belief, not yet, but the first crack in certainty. Mrs. Keene looked toward her. The apology did not come. Perhaps it could not in such a place. But shame came, and Mara saw it. Moorleigh recovered with effort. Even if I pass through the service wing, it does not explain the missing seal. There it was. The missing heart of the accusation. The silver seal. The object no one had found. Without it, truth still leaned too heavily on memory. Cressida seemed to sense the same thing, for her voice softened into sorrow. This is precisely why caution matters. We have smoke, perhaps. We have resentment. We have confusion. But no seal. No proof of theft. No proof against Mr. Moorleigh. And certainly no reason to set aside the possibility that Miss Ellery, frightened and clever, has woven unrelated incidents together to save herself. Mara heard the words as the room did. Frightened and clever. A dangerous combination when applied to a maid. Grim rose. No one had called him. His head lowered, and his eyes fixed upon Lady Cressida's reticule, a small blue silk purse hanging from her wrist by a silver chain. Cressida went still. Alastair, she said. Your dog is staring. The Duke turned. Grim took one step forward. Phelps whispered from the servants' wall, Easy, boy. Grim ignored him. Mara's pulse began to beat in her throat. The wolfhound was not growling. He was scenting. The same way he had scented the bait. The same way he had found her at the vicarage. Cressida lifted her reticule higher, almost imperceptibly. Moorleigh saw the movement. So did Mara. So did the Duke. Lady Cressida, Alastair said, very softly. Give Mr. Voss your reticule. Her face did not change. That was the marvel of her. Do not be absurd. Grim took another step. The hall forgot to breathe. The silver chain slipped against Cressida's glove. For the first time since Mara had known her, the lady looked not cruel, not elegant, not amused, but afraid. The hall did not move. It had become a single-held breath, all rank and service and gossip suspended between Lady Cressida's gloved hand and the great wolfhound standing before her. Grim did not bare his teeth. That would have been easier to dismiss as temper. He only stared at the blue silk reticule, his head lowered, his ears fixed forward, his body certain in the way only an animal could be certain. Lady Cressida's fingers tightened around the silver chain. This is absurd, she said. Her voice remained composed, but the words came too quickly. I will not have my belongings searched because a dog dislikes the scent of lavender. The Duke of Harrowmere looked at her as though the last veil had slipped, and he was deciding how much mercy truth deserved when truth had been hunted so long. Mr. Voss, he said. The solicitor stepped forward. Your Grace. You will receive Lady Cressida's reticule if she gives it freely. Cressida laughed once. It was a brittle sound, too fine to be amusement. If not, the Duke said, I will ask you before these witnesses why you refuse an inquiry you were so eager to conduct upon a servant's trunk. The words landed without heat. That made them worse. Mrs. Keene lowered her eyes. Mara felt the memory of her trunk opening before the servants, the letters exposed, the false coins bright against old wood. She had thought shame had weight when it fell upon the poor. Now she watched it drift toward a lady in blue silk and saw how desperately gentle society wished to be with its own. Cressida saw it too. Her chin lifted. Very well. Let us finish this little theatre. She held out the reticule to Mr. Voss, but Grim moved one step, and her hand jerked back. The chain slipped. The reticule struck the edge of the table, opened, and fell to the stone floor. A small silver object rolled out and spun in a bright circle beneath the candles. No one spoke until it stopped at the Duke's boot. The Harrowmere crest faced upward. The missing seal had returned to the house in the one place no maid could have hidden it. Mrs. Partridge gasped. Sir Lionel swore under his breath and then remembered Reverend Alder. Mrs. Keene gripped her keys as if they alone kept her standing. Moorleigh went grey. Cressida did not move. She looked at the seal, then at Mara, and in that instant Mara understood the final cruelty of powerful people. They were never more dangerous than when trapped by what they had expected others to suffer. She put it there, Cressida said. The words were quiet and immediate. Somehow. This maid has been in and out of rooms, near the dog, near the servants, near every passage. She put it there. Grim growled then. Not loud, not wild, but deep enough to pass through the hall like weather over the moor. The Duke bent and picked up the seal with his handkerchief. He did not look at Mara. He looked at the fallen reticule. Mr. Voss. The solicitor knelt, careful and methodical, and drew from the spilled contents a folded paper twist, a scrap of sacking thread, and 2 narrow notes sealed with pale wax. He opened one, read, and lifted his eyes toward Moorleigh. This concerns stable stores, Your Grace. Horse draft quantities. Not properly entered. Moorleigh swallowed. Those are routine memoranda. In Lady Cressida's reticule. Mrs. Alder asked. Her voice was dry enough to cut dust. Cressida turned on her. You forget to whom you speak. No, Mrs. Alder said. I remember very well. That is why I am disappointed. A sound moved among the tenants. Not laughter. Something sharper. The Duke held out his hand. The other note, Mr. Voss. The solicitor unfolded it. It refers to the kennel repairs, the replacement latch, and a payment marked as made to the blacksmith at Byre Cross. One of the tenant men stirred. My brother is that blacksmith, Your Grace. He said no such work was paid for. Morley's voice came thin. A clerical error. There seem to be many, the Duke said. Then he turned to the household wall. Phelps. The undergroom stepped forward, shaking. Your Grace. The night Grim broke loose after Miss Ellery left. What did you find at the kennel? Phelps looked at Moorleigh, then at the dog, then at Mara. Courage, when it finally came to him, looked less like bravery than relief. The latch had been fouled again, Your Grace. Not broken like before. Made loose. And there was meat near the stable path. I didn't say, because Mr. Moorleigh told me I would be turned off for carelessness. Moorleigh snapped, You lying fool. Grim surged half a pace forward. Mara spoke before anyone else could. Grim. The wolfhound stopped. Every face turned to her. Not because she had shouted. She had not. Because the feared creature obeyed her quiet voice in a hall full of commands. The Duke saw it, and something like grief crossed his face. Then he looked down at the faded blue ribbon above Grim's paw. There is one thing no false witness has explained, he said. Before the seal vanished, before the planted coins, before the powder, before any of this could profit her, Miss Ellery tore a ribbon from her own keepsake to bind an animal everyone else feared. His voice deepened, and the hall seemed to draw closer around it. No one was rewarding her. No one was praising her. She did not know I was watching when she knelt in the courtyard. She had every reason to step away, and none to be kind. Yet she saw a wound and tended it. Mara's throat tightened. She looked down, but his words would not let her disappear. That ribbon is not proof of rank, the Duke continued. It is proof of character. Grim did not follow Miss Ellery because she tricked him. He followed her because she was the first person in this house to treat his pain as something more than inconvenience. Cressida's face hardened. You will ruin yourself for sentiment. No, the Duke said. I nearly ruined an innocent woman for reputation. I will not do so twice. The hall went utterly still. Mara felt the apology before he gave it. It came not as softness, but as public fact. Miss Ellery was shamed in my house while under my authority. I allowed caution to stand where trust should have stood. Before every person who heard her accused, I say this, she did not steal my seal, she did not harm Grim, and she did not bring disorder to Moorleigh. She revealed it. Mara could not speak. She had imagined vindication as warmth, perhaps triumph, perhaps tears. Instead, it felt like being given back her own name after hearing strangers misuse it. The Duke turned to Moorleigh. You are dismissed from my service. Mr. Voss will take charge of the accounts. Every questionable payment, every rent entry, every repair charge, and every use of my seal will be examined. Moorleigh opened his mouth, but no defense arrived. The ledgers had taught him how to arrange numbers, not how to stand before truth once it had witnesses. Your Grace, he managed. I have served this house for years. Then you have had years to know better. The Duke looked to Cressida. That silence was different. Older. Colder. Lady Cressida, you will leave Moorleigh before sunset. Her face drained at last. You cannot mean to cast me out on the word of a servant. Not on her word alone. He gestured toward the seal, the notes, the powder, the witnesses, and Grim standing beside Mara. On yours. On what you hid. On what you allowed. On what you tried to make of a woman whose only crime was being easier to accuse than yourself. Cressida looked around the hall, seeking rescue from the same society she had trusted to obey her. Mrs. Partridge looked away. Sir Lionel stared at his shoes. Reverend Alder's mouth was stern. Even Mrs. Keene did not step forward. Polite cruelty had many admirers while it was winning. It had very few companions when exposed. This county will hear of your behavior, Cressida said. Yes, the Duke replied. From me. That ended it. Not with a shout. Not with collapse. With the simple terror of a powerful man choosing truth aloud. Cressida gathered what dignity she could from the floor, though her reticule remained in Mr. Voss's possession. Moorleigh stood like a man whose shadow had been removed. Mrs. Keene suddenly crossed the hall and stopped before Mara. Her curtsy was stiff, late, and painful to watch. Miss Ellery, she said, her voice rough, I was wrong. Mara could have made the moment sharper. She could have demanded more. She thought of her open trunk, her mother's letters, Bess's frightened face, and the servants who had learned cruelty by surviving under it. Yes, she said. Mrs. Keene flinched. Then Mara added, do better with the next girl no one believes. The housekeeper bowed her head. Grim moved then, not toward the fallen seal, not toward the Duke, but to Mara's side. His shoulder touched her skirt as it had in the passage on the first day, warm and steady. This time, no one laughed. No one called him beast. No one called her foolish. The Duke came toward her, stopping several feet away, with the entire hall watching the distance he chose not to cross. Miss Ellery, he said quietly, though his voice still carried, I cannot undo what was done to you here. No, Your Grace. But I will not hide the truth of it. That is a beginning. His eyes held hers, and in them she saw not the cold protector of Moorleigh, not the Duke whose rank silenced rooms, but the man who had learned too late that protection without trust could wound. May I earn the right to ask you to stay? The question moved through the hall more powerfully than any command he had given. Mara did not answer quickly. She would not let gratitude make another decision for her. She looked at Grim's ribbon, at the restored seal in Mr. Voss's careful hand, at the faces that had doubted and now had to remember. Then she looked back at the Duke. Not today, she said. A flicker of pain crossed his face, but he bowed his head. Then not today. Mara's voice softened, not for the hall, but for the truth between them. But perhaps, Your Grace, if you ask again when no one needs saving. For the first time, something like hope passed through his eyes. Grim leaned harder against her side, and the hall that had once gathered to judge a maid now stood silent before the woman who had refused to let shame become her confession. 3 months after Lady Cressida Vane left Moorleigh Hall in a closed carriage with no one waving from the steps, the house learned how to breathe without fear, listening at every keyhole. Change did not arrive in a flourish. It came in ledgers opened beneath Mr. Voss's careful hand, in tenant receipts corrected, in coins returned quietly to men who had paid what Moorleigh had pretended to forgive. It came when Phelps received no punishment for a latch he had not ruined, when Bessie spoke at table without glancing first toward Mrs. Keene, and when Grim walked through the lower passage one morning and no one pressed themselves flat against the wall. They still stepped aside. He was, after all, enormous. But they stepped aside with respect rather than panic, and sometimes Cook even saved a plain bone for him and pretended she had dropped it by mistake. Mrs. Keene remained 1 month after the inquiry, long enough to hand over keys, accounts, linen records, and apologies she could not quite shape into tenderness. On her last morning, she found Mara at the vicarage gate and placed a small paper parcel in her hands. Inside was the false scrap of blue ribbon, cut clean and cruel, no longer evidence, no longer useful. I kept it when I should not have, Mrs. Keene said, her face pale beneath her bonnet. I thought perhaps you would want it destroyed. Mara looked at the ribbon, then at the woman who had once opened her trunk before half the household. No, she said. Keep it. Mrs. Keene flinched. As a reminder? As a warning? Not to me. The housekeeper understood. Her mouth trembled once, but she curtsied with the stiffness of old habits and left for the cottage his Grace had arranged on the edge of the village, with a small pension and more silence than pride found comfortable. Mara did not return to service at Moorleigh. That was the first thing the Duke made certain of, and the first thing she required before she would listen to anything else he asked. It was Mrs. Alder who solved the matter with the brisk confidence of a woman who had no patience for romance when propriety had not been fed. Lady Beatrice Rowan, an elderly widow of good family and failing eyesight, required a reader companion at her small house near the church. She had no fear of scandal because she had outlived most people whose opinions might have entertained her. She received Mara in a room that smelled of lavender and old books, asked her to read from a volume of sermons for precisely 4 minutes, then shut the book with a snap. Excellent voice. Too much sadness in it, but that often improves poetry. You will do. And so Mara became Miss Ellery in a house where her trunk was her own, her letters remained tied, and no one mistook quietness for guilt. The Duke did not call the next day. That was his wisdom. He did not call the day after that either, which was harder. On the 5th day, a calling card arrived by hand, properly delivered to Lady Beatrice first. Lady Beatrice held it close to her eyes, squinted, and snorted. The Duke of Harrowmere. There is a man making a public nuisance of good manners. Mara folded her hands. You need not receive him. Nonsense. I am old, not dead. A remorseful duke is a rare entertainment. He came that afternoon and sat across the room with Lady Beatrice between them like an entire parliament of propriety. Grim waited outside beneath the window, having escorted him from Moorleigh and refused to be sent home. The Duke spoke of tenant repairs, of Mr. Voss's findings, of Morley's removal to face consequences beyond the estate. He did not speak of love. Mara was grateful. Love offered too soon after injustice could sound like another form of rescue. When he left, he bowed to Lady Beatrice, then to Mara. Miss Ellery. Your Grace. His eyes held hers for one careful heartbeat. I will call again only if permitted. Lady Beatrice answered before Mara could. You may apply in writing. It will give Miss Ellie practice refusing dukes if necessary. Something almost like a smile touched his mouth. A valuable skill. From that day, courtship came not as thunder, but as weather that learned the shape of the land. Calling cards. Walks along the church lane with Lady Beatrice or Mrs. Alder always near enough to cough judgment if required. Letters written in a restrained hand, never too warm, never careless, each one asking rather than assuming. Grim attended most walks and behaved as if he had personally negotiated the future. At first, villagers stared. Then they bowed. Then they began speaking to Mara as if they had always known she was worthy of being addressed with respect, which did not deceive her, but did not embitter her either. People often needed time to become better than their first judgment. The Duke gave them no permission to remain worse. When Sir Lionel Partridge joked too loudly at the church gate that Harrowmere had let his wolfhound choose his bride, the Duke replied, "Grim has shown better judgment than most men in the county." Sir Lionel did not make the joke again. By winter's edge, Moorleigh itself had changed enough for Mara to enter without feeling the old walls close around her throat. The great hall no longer looked like judgment. The table near the hearth held no accusation now, only a small locked case Mr. Voss had placed there at the Duke's request. Inside, laid on dark velvet, rested the restored silver seal and the faded blue ribbon that had once circled Grim's paw. Mara saw them on the morning Lady Beatrice brought her to Moorleigh for a parish subscription luncheon. The ribbon looked smaller than she remembered. That startled her. The thing that had carried so much truth was only a strip of cloth after all. Perhaps all symbols were like that. Small enough to fit in a palm, strong enough to shame a room. The Duke found her standing before the case while Grim slept beside the hearth, no longer barred from any respectable fire in the house. Lady Beatrice had gone to argue with Reverend Alder about parish coal, which left the door open and the hall occupied by distant voices. Proper enough. Still, he stopped several feet away. He always did now unless invited closer. "I wondered whether keeping it there was unkind," he said. Mara looked at the ribbon. "No. It reminds the house what it learned." "And you?" "It reminds me I was right to kneel when everyone else stepped back." His face changed, not with admiration alone, but with humility. "You were right in many things." "Not all." "No? I thought being seen would ruin me." She looked around the hall, at the portraits, the polished floor, the place where her disgrace had been returned to her as dignity. "It depends who is looking, and whether they are brave enough to see clearly." He absorbed that in silence. Then he took a small box from inside his coat, not opening it yet. Mara's breath caught. He saw and waited. That waiting was why she did not step away. "I told you once I wished to earn the right to ask you to stay," he said. "You told me, very wisely, not that day." "It was not the right day." "Is this?" Mara looked toward the open doorway, where Lady Beatrice's voice rose in indignation over coal prices. She looked at Grim, who had opened one eye as if to supervise. She looked at the man before her, no longer only the Duke who had failed her in a public pause, but the man who had spent months learning how not to make his regret her burden. "Ask," she said. He opened the box. The ring inside was not ostentatious. A small sapphire, deep blue, set between two old diamonds that had likely belonged to his mother or grandmother. "Mara Ellery," he said, and her name in his mouth no longer sounded like record or rescue, but recognition. "Will you marry me, not because I defended you too late, not because my house wronged you, and not because gratitude asks anything from you, but because I love the woman who saw a wound where others saw danger, and because I would count it the honor of my life to be seen as clearly by you?" The hall blurred slightly, though she did not cry. "Not quite." "And if I say yes, will I still be allowed to disagree with you?" His mouth softened. "I am relying on it." "And Grim?" At that, the wolfhound rose, crossed the hall, and placed himself beside her skirts with the gravity of a witness. The Duke looked down at him. "I have long suspected Grim believed I am the one being admitted to the family." Mara laughed then, freely enough that the sound rose to the portraits and gave them something new to endure. "Then yes," she said. "I will marry you." He did not seize her hands. He did not forget the open door, the watching world, or the woman she had fought to remain. He bowed over her gloved hand with a reverence so restrained that it moved her more than any display could have done. When Lady Beatrice entered moments later, she took in the ring, the Duke's face, Mara's composure, and Grim's insufferable satisfaction. "Well," she said. "The dog looks pleased. I suppose the rest of us may follow." Months later, when spring touched the moor with green and the old chapel at Moorleigh opened its doors, Mara walked toward Alastair Renford not as a maid rescued from disgrace, but as a woman whose name had been returned to her and honored before all who mattered. Mrs. Alder stood near the front, pretending not to weep. Bessie beamed from the household pew. Phelps kept one careful hand on Grimm's collar, though Grimm behaved with noble dignity until the vows were finished. Afterward, in the quiet of the great hall, Mara paused before the little case where the silver seal and faded ribbon rested side by side. One had once commanded the county. The other had saved the truth. Alastair came to stand beside her, close now because she had chosen it. Grimm leaned against her skirts, as he had done from the beginning, a gentle shadow no longer feared for his silence. Outside, Moorleigh Hall rang with voices, footsteps, and life. Inside, Mara touched the glass above the ribbon and understood at last that dignity was not something rank could grant. It was something she had carried all along, even when no one had known how to see it.